Chapter 1066. The soldiers under Qutaybah's command were the vanguard of this battle, and they were also the most experienced soldiers on the battlefield. Even though this was their first time seeing the beehives, all of them had almost instantly found the best way to deal with them. The Arabs, who viewed war and conquest as their mission, had no such thing as comradeship. As long as they could help win the war, they would show no mercy, even if the corpses of their soldiers were turned into porcupines. Thud thud thud. One corpse after another was thrown forward, and in the blink of an eye, more than half of the beehives had been cut off. Damn it! The Tang dynasty generals behind the first defense line all paled at this sight. The Arabs had reacted far too quickly, and their methods were cruel and merciless, completely unexpected. In just a few seconds, these powerful beehives had essentially been crippled. None of them had ever imagined that such a thing could happen. Kill them! No matter how the Tang dynasty reacted, the moment the beehives were stopped, the Arab cavalry began to press forward like a swarm of locusts. Nay! The first defense line was once more hit by a storm of attacks, and the pressure on everyone's shoulders increased. Pikemen attack! A loud and clear voice rang out from the front lines, speaking not in Han, but in greater and lesser valor. Bang! Tens of thousands of pikemen of greater and lesser valor suddenly stepped forward, the sharp spears in their hands piercing through the gaps in the defense line to stab at the shieldmen in the first line. Plush plush plush. Blood spurted out as the most formidable pikemen of greater and lesser valor displayed their most powerful ability to pierce through armor. One sharp spear after another pierced through the armor of the Arab cavalry, stabbing into their vitals. Plush plush plush. The pikemen lashed out again, and the Arab cavalry and their horses began to fall to the ground. Greater and lesser valor were only small kingdoms in the western regions, but even these small kingdoms had their own unique traits. Back then, in order to hire these spearmen, Wang Chong had paid a large sum of money. Of the 10 million taels of gold allocated by the imperial court, a considerable part was given to greater and lesser valor, and the power of the spearmen was fully displayed at this time. But no matter how formidable the spearmen were, they could not stop the frenzied Arab assault. At the very front of the defensive line, all the shield soldiers were under unimaginable pressure. The muscles on their shoulders were bulging, and the veins were bulging as if they were about to jump out. Their thighs trembled, every muscle jumping. All of the shield soldiers clenched their teeth, their foreheads dripping with sweat. The consumption of stellar energy was secondary. The consumption of physical strength was the most unbearable. Every shield soldier suffered an unimaginable amount of attacks every second. Second platoon, forward. Wang Chong waved his hand and waved the flag. The second platoon's shield bearers immediately rushed forward and smashed their shields into the ground. The shield men of the first platoon seemed to be relieved of a heavy burden, and they began to skillfully retreat, their armor drenched in cold sweat. The three platoons had practiced the rotation of the shield men countless times, and they could seamlessly and without any problems. Third platoon forward. A few moments later, with another order, the Anxi Protectorate Army infantry began to replace the shield bearers. Wave after wave of shield bearers was replaced, with one group on the front line, one resting and one waiting for orders. Everything proceeded in an orderly fashion. Through this method, the first defense line was able to barely hold against the storm of Arab attacks. Rumble! Just when the battle was at its most intense, a massive boom came from the center of the Arab formation. Marky, look! A voice came from the side. Xue Qinjuan's eyes suddenly widened as he stared ahead. Wang Chong said nothing as he followed Xue Qinjuan's gaze. In the rear of the Arab formation, he saw that something unexpected had occurred. Huge silver-white machines that were more than 3 meters wide and taller than a person could be seen. Behind each silver-white machine, there were 7 to 10 people escorting them as they drove towards the first defense line. These silver weapons appeared extremely heavy, and they made a particularly loud noise as they moved. Although he didn't know what they were, Wang Chong's eyes twitched as he instinctively sensed that something was wrong. Inform Chen Bin to move out quickly. Wang Chong immediately ordered without turning his head. Crick, crick. Almost at the same time, Chen Bin, who was standing on the military transport vehicle, also noticed the silver-white equipment. His expression was solemn, and his long hair danced rapidly in the air. Release! A sword swung down, leaving a faint scar in the air. Following Qinbin's order, the more than 1,000 Tang Dynasty ballistae began to change directions. Boom boom boom. There was a metallic clattering as the ballista bolts struck the silver weapons of the Arab army like dragons emerging from the sea. There was a series of rumbling sounds of steel. Although the dense crossbow bolts hit the silver-white machines, they were quickly blocked, and not even a dent was left on them. Only 30 to 40 Arab soldiers escorting the silver weapons were caught off guard and pierced through by the ballista bolts, dropping to the ground. Adjust the scales to 15. Take aim at the soldiers escorting the silver weapons. Release. Chen Bin's eyes flashed with cold light as he changed tactics. Plush plush plush. Plush plush plush. The ballista bolts showed their effects once more. Screams filled the air as more than 2,000 Arab soldiers transporting the silver weapons were shot to death. The ballista bolts did not stop there, killing another 3,000 Arab soldiers. Defend! Shouts in Arabic resounded over the battlefield. Just as the soldiers escorting the silver-white equipment fell to the ground, the huge silver-white equipment began to change rapidly. Amidst the screeching sounds of gears, an enormous silver plate popped out from the left wing, followed by the right wing and then the top. Soon after, countless fan-shaped steel plates shot out, shielding both the silver weapons and the soldiers behind them. Behind them, countless Arab soldiers began to pour in from the rear. Even some of the cavalry galloping past dismounted and gathered behind the silver weapons. More than 2,000 Arab soldiers escorting the silver weapons had been killed, but even more were pouring in. Not only that, the massive and mysterious silver weapons began to move faster and faster as the Arab soldiers pushed them forward. They were getting closer and closer to the first defense line. Wushang cavalry, get ready. Wang Chang's eyes widened as he immediately ordered, Iron Wall Army, get ready. At almost the same time, another voice came from nearby. Gao Xianzhi had a solemn expression on his face as he gave the same order. He looked forward with an extremely grave expression. Just like Wang Chong, he also sensed an immense danger from these silver weapons. The silver weapons in the rear of the Arab army were getting faster and faster, getting closer and closer to the steel walls. The air was instantly fraught with tension. The rumbling of the wheels seemed to weigh heavily on the hearts of the Arabs. In front of the first defense line, Wang Chong and Gao Xianzhi stood to the left and right, their expressions extremely grave. On the other end of the battlefield, beneath the black banner of flame, the governor of war, Qutayba, was riding his massive warhorse, his golden halo shrouding him. But as the silver weapons advanced, a sharp and cold light flashed through Qutayba's eyes. As the governor of Arabia, Qutayba had spent almost his entire life at war. In his life, he had encountered all sorts of opponents and all sorts of defensive measures. Tall walls, sturdy fortresses, layers of heavy shields, and all sorts of familiar and unfamiliar, strange and ordinary war machines. In the face of Arabia and the governor of war, Qutayba's edge, many opponents had chosen to defend, hoping to wear down the Arabs in a defensive battle, just like the Tang. But in the end, not a single faction or empire had been able to survive against the battle-hardened Qutayba. Qutayba had found a way to deal with any tactic or opponent. To deal with those defensive opponents who refused to come out, Qutayba had ordered the imperial craftsmen to build a special kind of siege weapon. The silver behemoths. In other words, these huge silver-white war machines in front of them. Rumble. In the disturbing noises, the enormous silver machines were getting closer and closer to the iron defense line under the cover of the army. Finally, after an earth-shattering noise, if one were to look down from the sky, they would be able to see an enormous rectangular iron hammer dashing out of the silver machines like a tongue. Under the effect of the heavy machinery, it carried a terrifying force and fiercely crashed into a steel wall in front of it. A moment later, all the Tang Dynasty soldiers felt their breaths stop. The previously incomparably heavy and indestructible steel wall suddenly trembled, and was instantly sent flying by a tremendous force. Even the shield bearers and spear bearers behind them were sent flying into the sky like pieces of paper. After drawing an arc in the air, they fell heavily into the army more than 200 feet away. Boom boom boom. One silver weapon after another moved to stand in front of the steel walls, and one mallet after another shot out. In the blink of an eye, the silver behemoths that Qutayba had brought with him from the north had sent one steel wall after another flying into the air like pieces of paper. Chapter 1067. Siege Weapons. Short-range siege weapons. They had a shorter range than catapults, but they were many times more powerful and sturdy. And with the assault of these silver behemoths, the Tang dynasty's defense line was instantly left with an irreparable gap. Kaio! Fierce shouts rang out as the Arab cavalry charged through the gap, their faces savage and ferocious. Kill them! Countless Arabs had savage expressions on their faces as they madly charged into the Tang camp. The terrifying power of cavalry and the ferocity of the Arabs were on full display at this moment. Bang bang bang! One Tang dynasty soldier after another was sent flying into the air like a string being cut from a string. The short gap quickly turned into a huge mess. Under the relentless assault of the Arabs, the gap continued to widen, and the shockwaves spread to a much larger area. Hold! Don't let them get in! Stop them! If we let them get in, we'll lose. Kaio! Everyone follow me! Seeing this scene, everyone became anxious. The eyes of the shield-bearers, axemen, spearmen, and mercenaries nearby turned red. They roared and charged toward the gap. But it was too late. The hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry had been charging at the first defense line for a long time, and now, they had finally found a vent, releasing all their pressure. Screams filled the air as soldier after soldier fell in the face of the Arab charge. Even in the moment of death, they were still doing their utmost to charge forward, but their individual strength was far too limited. In the face of wave after wave of the Arabs, they were like ants trying to shake a tree, incapable of holding on. Iron Wall Army, get ready. Gao Xianji immediately unsheathed his sword. With his order, the 4,000 Iron Wall Army soldiers quickly assembled, their bodies exploding with a powerful aura as they aimed their eyes at the gap. The collapse was already taking shape. Ordinary soldiers could not stop the Arab flood of steel. If they wanted to plug this gap, they could only rely on the Iron Wall Army. Attack! Gao Xianji pointed his sword, and the 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army strode forward, their gazes resolute as they charged toward the gap. Clang! When they reached the gap, all the soldiers of the Iron Wall Army drew their swords in unison. The 4,000 swords vibrated in unison, forming an intimidating pressure. Kill them all! The leading Iron Wall Army soldier's eyes flashed with cold light as he swung his sword and led the rest of the Iron Wall Army like a tiger charging into a flock of sheep. Swish! The leading Iron Wall Army soldier swung his sword, the tip of his sword piercing through the Arab horseman's back and emerging from his back. Bang! With a flick of his wrist, the Iron Wall Army soldier threw the Arab horseman and his horse into the air. This man and his horse, together with their armor, weighed nearly 1,000 jin, but the Iron Wall Army soldier's sword seemed as light as a feather. With a single swing, they were sent flying 7 or 8 zhang away, knocking away a large number of Arab cavalry. Boom! After killing the first Arab horseman, the Iron Wall Army soldier strode forward, stabbing his sword into another Arab horseman. One step after another, the Iron Wall Army soldier strode forward, his footsteps firm and firm. Plush! Plush! Blood gushed into the air as the Iron Wall Army soldier slashed out with his sword, killing a man with each step. Massive booms could be heard as more and more Arab cavalry were cut down like weeds. Not a single one of these Arab cavalry was able to stop the advance of the Iron Wall Army. Boom boom boom. When more than 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army advanced together and killed together, their momentum was overwhelming and unstoppable. Nay! The panicked whinnies of the warhorses rang out. In the face of the terrifying and cruel aura of the 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall Army, even the well-trained and fearless Arab warhorses felt a sense of dread, neighing in fear as they attempted to flee from these fearsome Iron Wall Army soldiers. Boom boom boom. The 4,000 Iron Wall Army soldiers continued to advance with terrifying speed. No matter how many Arab cavalry charged at them, they were unable to stop their momentum. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, these famed Arab cavalry were unable to take a single blow from the Iron Wall army. Their corpses piled up into mountains across the battlefield. Kill them! The first to notice this sight was the Crimson Moon Vanguard. A horseman of the Crimson Moon Vanguard swung his scimitar at the Iron Wall army soldiers in front of him. Kill! The massive scimitar left a long scar in the air, the savage faces of the Crimson Moon Vanguard reflected on its scarlet surface. The Crimson Moon Vanguard was an experienced warrior who had slain countless formidable foes. He had put all his strength into this crimson leap. Even steel would be split apart by this scimitar, let alone flesh and blood. But in the face of this mountain-sundering attack, the Iron Wall army soldier stood straight like a rock, his cold and aloof face devoid of emotion. His callous eyes glanced at the Crimson Moon Vanguard, and then he thrust his sword forward. Swish! The sharp tip of the sword pierced through the warhorse, through the Crimson Moon Vanguard, and out his back. Time seemed to stop, and the massive scimitar could no longer continue. One man and one horse, weighing more than 1,000 jin, were held in the air by a sword, unable to move. How could this be? How could there be such a powerful warrior in the Eastern world? The Crimson Moon Vanguard soldier's eyes went round in disbelief. At the moment before his death, he had felt a deep chill in his heart. After conquering so many factions and killing so many foes, for the first time, he had learned that there was a warrior in the world so skilled in killing. Before he could fully execute his Crimson Moon slash, his opponent had struck his vitals. This strike was clean and precise, without any unnecessary movement. It was so terrifying that it would plunge one into a nightmare. Rumble! The 4,000 Iron Wall army soldiers charged forward with unstoppable momentum, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake as the Crimson Moon Vanguard was completely wiped out. Craftsmen, get ready to mend the gap. A loud voice resounded over the first defense line, and then a creaking sound could be heard from the battlefield. Complicated mechanical arms, operated by countless craftsmen, swiftly moved to the front of the defense line, lifting steel walls weighing tens of thousands of jin. Boom! The steel walls dropped down, long spikes stabbing into the earth. In the blink of an eye, a new steel wall had appeared, and then a second, a third. During this entire process, the 4,000 soldiers of the Iron Wall army stood in a straight line, blocking the gap and blocking the heavy attacks of the army. No matter how many Arab soldiers charged at them, these 4,000 soldiers remained steadfast. The morale of the Iron Wall army was instantly boosted, and the shieldmen, axemen, sabermen, and spearmen began to gather and establish a new defense line. All Wushang cavalry, hear my order. Move out at any moment. Meanwhile, on the other side of the battlefield, Wang Chong, mounted on the white-hoofed shadow, coldly stared at the silver war machines behind the first defense line. After destroying the first steel city wall, these huge silver-white war machines were moving rapidly under the cover of the army, heading towards the steel defense line in other directions. Although the Iron Wall army was powerful, if they did not deal with these silver war machines, the danger would still exist. The tens of thousands of Arab soldiers would still be able to charge in through these gaps. Boom! Just when the several hundred war machines were about to reach a new section of the steel wall, Li Sai's eyes flashed with cold light as he unsheathed the sword on his back and took the lead, charging through the gap and into the vast sea of Arab soldiers. 10 charges, 10 victories. Without the slightest hesitation, Li Sai led several thousand of his elite Wushang cavalry in unleashing one of the 10 most powerful formations of the apocalyptic world. 10 charges, 10 victories was originally an array formation used to deal with this kind of vast sea of opponents that far outnumbered one's own. Hong Long Long, there was a series of earth-shattering booms, and it was as if the entire world was being torn apart. The 4,000 Wushang cavalry exploded with an enormous momentum that completely suppressed the hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry on the front line. Ugh! Screams filled the air as halos clashed with halos, swords clashed with swords, and warhorses collided with warhorses. Whether it was the elite soldiers Qutayba had brought from the northern war zone, Abu Muslim soldiers, or even Governor Osman's soldiers, the 4,000 Wushang cavalry instantly crumbled. No one could stop them. Huang Badian, take some people to stop those Arab soldiers. Kong Xian, you take some people to destroy those silver war machines. With Li Sai's order, the 4,000 Wushang cavalry divided into 2 groups to carry out the mission. Bang bang bang. The 4,000 Wushang cavalry turned around and charged at one of the silver war machines. Wherever the swords passed, countless Arab cavalry screamed as their horses were sent flying more than 100 feet away. Their exquisite Arab scimitars snapped in the face of the Wuzi steel weapons. Many of the Arab cavalry didn't even have time to react. All they saw was a flash of cold light, the sound of armor being torn apart, and then they vomited blood. When they looked down, they realized that the blood had come from their chests, and then their vision darkened as they dropped to the ground. Chapter 1068. The wind began to howl. The situation was urgent, and Kong Xian had no time to say anything. He unsheathed his wood steel sword and slashed at the exposed mechanisms of the silver weapons. Clang. Kong Xian's all-out attack was only able to leave a gap of around an inch on the surface of the silver weapons. These were the behemoths that Kateba had brought from the northern battlefield. They had been thoroughly tempered and fused with many precious materials. Moreover, they had been imbued with thousands of defensive and toughening inscriptions, making them unimaginably tough. Not even the attacks of the Tang dynasty ballistae could effectively harm them. This was also why Kong Xian had decided to circle around the body of the carriage and attack the weakest of the exposed mechanisms. Clang. As Kong Xian pulled out his sword, another Wuzi steel sword slashed down, leaving behind a shallow wound on the exposed mechanism. Then came a third, fourth, fifth. Hundreds of Wuzi steel swords slashed down, and in just a few seconds, the exposed mechanisms of the silver behemoths had been shattered. Kong Xian's group swung down a few more times, destroying the crucial components of the silver mechanisms. Let's go! Kong Xian's eyes flashed with cold light as he lunged at a second silver weapon. In just a few seconds, this silver weapon had been destroyed. Kill! The Arab cavalry panicked at the sight of the silver war machine being attacked, and they began to rush forward in a frenzy. But none of them were a match for the power of the 10 charges, 10 victories. The more ferocious their charge, the faster they would fall. Boom boom boom. Kong Xian's group was like a whirlwind, constantly attacking the silver weapons. In a few short moments, more than half of the silver weapons had been destroyed. Kong Xian's group moved with incredible speed, spending only a brief moment in front of each of the silver weapons. Moreover, with more than 2,000 soldiers divided into 60-some groups, their momentum was so overwhelming that not even the Arabs could save them. In just a few moments, several hundred silver weapons had been destroyed, their surroundings littered with corpses. In this whirlwind charge, the 4,000 Wushang cavalry had killed more than 9,000 Arab cavalry, all of them elites. Kill them! The 4,000 Wushang cavalry charged through the sea of Arab cavalry a few more times, wreaking havoc and carpeting the ground with blood. Finally, they turned around and charged back behind the first defense line, not a single person injured. How was it? A voice came from behind the defense line, but Wang Chong didn't even turn his head. Too powerful. Li Sai gave a long sigh, his breathing somewhat ragged. Behind him, the 4,000 Wushang cavalry were also a little pale as they gasped for breath. Although the 4,000 Wushang cavalry had been completely unscathed, the energy they had expended was unimaginable. A whirlwind-like charge back and forth, the amount of stamina consumed was comparable to a regular battle. The overall strength of this wave of Arabs is much higher than before. All of them are elites. Their training, techniques, martial arts, proficiency with their weapons, the halos under their feet, and their coordination with each other are all far superior to the soldiers under Abu Muslim's command. Li Sai knew what Wang Chong was asking and sternly said. As a top-class general who had spent time in the Biding Protectorate, Li Sai had a sharp eye and an extremely accurate judgment of his opponents. This battle had seemed glorious, a whirlwind of slaughter that had destroyed several hundred silver war machines and easily killed more than 9,000 great Tang elites while completely unscathed. But only people like Li Sai, who had been on the front lines of the enemy formation, knew the ferocity and intensity of this battle. With just our 60,000 soldiers, I'm afraid that we won't be able to last very long. Li Sai hesitated for a very long time before finally saying this. The difference in numbers between the two sides was far too obvious. Moreover, the Arabs had brought no ordinary soldiers, but elite soldiers. Even the Wushang cavalry had consumed a great deal of energy to charge back and forth, let alone the others. Wang Chong said nothing, but his heart sank. Li Sai was the kind of person who wouldn't give up easily even if his opponent was very strong. He wouldn't say something like, "It's hard to hold on for too long." If he said something like that, it could only mean one thing. The real situation was much more serious than what he said. The disparity in numbers was still a problem that the Tang dynasty could not overcome. "Withdraw and rest well. I will call for you in a little while," Wang Chong ordered. "Yes, Margaret," Li Sai deferentially replied. Li Sai didn't even have the time to meditate. He sat on the tall Fergana horse, closed his eyes, and quickly began to adjust his breathing. Waves of hot white steam quickly rose from all parts of his body, and the aura within Li Sai's body also slowly recovered. The battle was extremely intense, and the first defense line was under unimaginable pressure at every moment. Li Sai and the Wushang cavalry simply did not have enough time to rest. The more than 4,000 soldiers had to be ready to enter the battlefield at any time. "Milord, do we need to join the Mo saber unit?" The King Ganka, mounted on his white and black-spotted steed, suddenly asked. For more than a month, the King Ganka, Shi Yuanqing, and Lu Shi had been training the Mo saber unit. This was a new unit, a new type of soldier, and also a powerful one. Most importantly, there were 10,000 of them, and they were the best weapon to deal with such a large number of people and an ocean-like charge. The Wushang cavalry had already entered the field, as had the Iron Wall army. Only the equally powerful Mo saber unit had yet to enter the field. Now is not the time. Wang Chong shook his head, his expression solemn and grave as he gazed at the 4 black banners fluttering in the distance. The Arabs still haven't sent any of their most powerful soldiers. Governor Osman of Cairo's strongest army hasn't moved, Abu Muslim's strongest army hasn't moved, and the Mamelukes haven't moved. In addition, not a single one of their 5 commanders has moved. The situation on the front line was extremely dangerous. Even those heavy steel walls that should have been impossible to move were fiercely swaying and on the verge of collapse. Whether it was Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Gao Xianji, or Cheng Qianli, any one of them could drastically change the situation of the army. But the 4 of them did not dare to act rashly. 3 Arab governors, 1 deputy governor, and the Mamluk commander, not a single one of these 5 great generals had moved. If low-level soldiers were to waste their strength in battle, it would be like exposing one's back to a large beast, revealing one's weakness. The result was certain to be a destructive blow. The battles between armies were important, but the battles between great generals were the crucial factor. On the other end of the battlefield, far away from the first defense line, 4 massive black banners fluttered in the wind, but beneath these banners, there was only silence. This place was like a completely different world from the shouts and fighting on the front line. This was the first time the army other than Abu Muslim had experienced the power of the Eastern world, the power of the Eastern Song Mountains. In a few short moments, this empire called the Tang dynasty had dispatched at least 2 powerful armies, using their overwhelming advantage to kill many of the elite Arab warriors. At this moment, they finally understood why the illustrious governor of Iron and Blood had been defeated by the Tang dynasty. At the very least, this eastern army of the Tang people was not as weak as they had imagined. "Milord, should we send out the Beheader army? Our opponents are extremely powerful. Only the Beheader army will be able to contend against them." Behind Governor Osman of Cairo, a deputy general suddenly urged his horse forward and said, "The Beheader army was the god of the Nile River, a legendary crocodile of the Nile. As the governor of Cairo, the most powerful troop under Osman's command was named after decapitation. This group of soldiers had followed Osman to fight all over the place, continuously winning in wars of blood and fire. Although they were few in number, they were extremely experienced and their strength far surpassed the other soldiers. In the conquest of the Sassanid dynasty, Osman's beheader army had been the backbone of the army, making great contributions in sweeping away the powerful Sassanid Empire. The enemy's 4,000 foot soldiers possessed extraordinary strength. Of Osman's subordinates, only the beheader army could deal with them. Since that's the case, leave the Eastern Wushang cavalry to me. Mamluk commander Aibak coldly sneered as he rode forward. He cared little for the Anshi Iron Wall army. What he truly cared about was the Wushang cavalry, led by Li Sai. I believe that the Mamelukes and I will be more than happy to tear them to shreds. Aibak's lips curled into a cruel smile. These Eastern Wushang cavalry had used a whirlwind style to destroy many Tang elites, demonstrating their strength and the right to stand against the Mamluks. Aibak's eyes shone with intense interest. Ziyad, get ready. On the other side, beneath the scimitar of black flames, Abu Muslim suddenly turned his head to Ziyad, his expression solemn. The Tang dynasty had already mobilized the Iron Wall army and the Wushang cavalry. Ordinary elite soldiers would not be able to stop them. The Arabs would also have to mobilize their strongest armies in the rear. Just like how Gao Xianji had cultivated an extremely powerful Iron Wall army through his many years of campaigning, Abu Muslim had a powerful army serving as the core of his army. There's no need. Chapter 1069. He lightly squeezed his legs together, and the golden-armored 2-meter-tall Arabian steed, Victor, immediately took 2 steps forward and stood out from the rest of the group. Buzz! In an instant, the surroundings were deathly silent. The hearts of the 3 of them shook as they gazed at the figure that was tall and sturdy like a god, but none of them spoke. Too slow. Dealing with a trifling Tang dynasty takes far too much time. That magnetic voice rang out above everyone's heads. Boom! Before anyone could react, there was a flash of light, and the earth quaked. That golden, godlike figure had already flipped off the horse's back and landed on the ground. In that instant, the 3 of them were stunned. They stared blankly at the dazzling figure, and a hint of awe appeared in their eyes. Qutayba, you, Governor Osman opened his mouth to speak, but just when he was about to speak, a gust of wind stirred up. Before Osman could react, the governor of war, Qutayba, who had remained motionless this entire time, suddenly strode forward, his back ramrod straight. His expression was relaxed and he appeared to be slowly walking forward, but his true speed was faster than a galloping horse. When he dismounted, he was only a few steps away, but by the time Osman called out to him, Qutayba was already more than 300 feet away. Before Osman could finish speaking, Qutayba's figure had already vanished into the vast sea of soldiers. From a distance, all one could see was a dazzling streak of golden light moving in a straight line toward Talas, toward the first defense line of the Tang people. Governor Osman stared at Qutayba's back in shock, his hands still hanging in the air. For a moment, he was at a loss for words. There's no need to call him. This madman's fighting style is completely different from ours. Aibak called out from the side, a bright light in his eyes. A commander would never lightly step onto the battlefield. If the commander had to step onto the battlefield in every battle, what was the point of soldiers? The commander-in-chief was more used to strategize, command and dispatch, observe the opponent's flaws, and search for the right opportunity. He was not the vanguard. Furthermore, once the commander-in-chief took action and personally arrived on the battlefield, it usually meant that the battle had reached the final moment to decide the victor. This was a rule that all the generals in both the East and the West adhered to. But Qutayba's fighting style was completely different. He had long ago heard that Qutayba liked to take the lead in battle. Alone, he would lead his army and use his overwhelming strength to open a gap, destroy the enemy, and slay the enemy commander, ending the battle like a bolt of lightning. But hearing about it was one thing, and actually seeing it and experiencing it was another. The Tang dynasty had only sent out 2 armies, and none of the commanders had moved. On the Arab side, the Mamelukes had not entered the field, nor had Osman, Abu Muslim, and Aibak, the other elite imperial great generals. The battle had not even reached its climax, but the governor of war, Qutayba, could no longer hold back and had moved ahead of time. This left the 3 illustrious Arab governors and commanders dumbfounded, and they found it somewhat difficult to adapt to this situation. Why did Lord Qutayba intervene? "Milords, let's go as well. These Eastern Tang people are much stronger than we imagined, and they also have 4 elite imperial great generals. If Lord Qutayba is alone, he might be at a disadvantage." Ziyad finally couldn't help but break the silence as he stared at the distant Qutayba. Governor Osman, Mamluk commander Ibak, and the highest commander of the Arab Eastern War Zone, Abu Muslim, quietly stood there, their backs straight as if they were rooted to the ground. None of them moved an inch. Ziyad was dumbfounded by this sight. "Ziyad, there's no need. Qutayba is different from the other governors you know." In the end, it was Abu Muslim who spoke. His expression was calm, and he looked straight ahead without turning his head. When he personally goes into battle, he doesn't like other people interfering. If we intervene at this time, not only will he not appreciate our kindness, he'll even take it out on us. I don't want to get into a conflict with him at a time like this. In addition, don't think that the governor of war is too weak. For Abu Muslim's sake, Ibak also spoke up. Just like Abu Muslim, he looked forward without turning his head. Although the other side has 4 great generals, if they were to face Qutayba, it's really not certain who would win. In this world, there really aren't many people who can make Qutayba suffer a loss. Beneath the black banner of the Nile, Governor Osman gave a slight nod, clearly agreeing with Ibak's view. As the Arabian war god and one of the strongest governors, Qutayba's way of doing things and speaking made all the other governors extremely displeased. But even those who disliked him had to admit that Qutayba's arrogance and maverick were backed by his indisputable strength. Thus, even though Qutayba had interrupted Ibak and ridiculed Abu Muslim, these 2 powerful Arab commanders had no complaints, much less retort. In the Arabian Empire, where strength reigned supreme, strength meant everything. As the governor of war, Qutayba had the right to be arrogant. Under the banner, Ziyad looked at the solemn expressions on the faces of the commanders around him and then at Qutayba's back. In the end, he was speechless. Although Qutayba said there's no need, he's still here to help us. "Ziyad, send out my Iron Blood army." Abu Muslim said. "Since that's the case, Rahman, send out our Beheader army as well. I presume that Qutayba won't mind our help in this way." Cairo's Governor Osman also spoke. He and Abu Muslim had been friends for many years and had fought side by side on many illustrious feats. As long as the 2 stood together, they would advance and retreat together at any time. "Yes, milord." Ziyad rejoiced, bowed, and then swiftly withdrew. Putting aside what was happening in the rear, the governor of war's Qutayba's intervention on the front line had caused an irreversible change in the course of the battle. Bang! This simple step caused the earth to sway and dust to fly into the air. No one could describe the power erupting from Qutayba's body. The entire battlefield trembled and buzzed as if it couldn't endure his dreadful might. Qutayba's body was covered in thick golden armor that exuded a light brighter than the sun. He was like a god walking the mortal battlefield. Oh! Qutayba's eyes flashed like lightning, piercing through space to lock onto the distant Tang dynasty defense line. Bzz. Before the soldiers could react, Qutayba had vanished from their sight. When he reappeared, he was several dozen feet away. Bang! The earth quaked as Qutayba took another step, and in a flash of light, he appeared even farther away. He seemed to be moving slowly, but in reality, he was incredibly fast. With each flash, he was much closer to the first defense line. In just a few moments, he had left thousands of soldiers behind. When he was still 200-some feet from the first defense line, Qutayba suddenly stopped. Clang! With one dragon roar after another, Qutayba reached behind his back and pulled out that famed golden divine sword of the Arabian Empire that had killed countless experts and struck fear into the hearts of countless empires, God's might. In a flash, the golden light around Qutayba's body swelled to several dozen times its original size, transforming into a thick golden flame that soared into the heavens. Even space itself began to distort. "Marquis!" A voice suddenly rang out. Xue Qianjuan's eyes widened as he stared at that golden figure at the front of the army. For some reason, this figure made Xue Qianjuan's heart thump in fear and unease. At the same time, Wang Chong also noticed that distant figure. Almost at the same time, there was an earth-shattering roar. Boundless halos of energy burst forth and gathered on a single person. As everyone watched, Wang Yan's body suddenly rose from the ground and rapidly swelled, transforming into an enormous golden-armored god. The mighty miracle god. Wang Yan clearly sensed the danger and immediately used the power of the formation. In the blink of an eye, he broke into the great general level. At this moment, 20 feet away, amidst the thousands of Arab cavalry, Qutayba began to move. His eyes flashed with cold light as he thrust his golden sword, God's might, into the ground. Rumble! Qutayba first appeared 20 feet away, but by the time everyone could see him again, he was already in front of the defense line, his golden sword, God's might, thrusting it into the ground. There was a heaven-shaking boom as golden flames seeped into the ground. With Qutayba as the boundary, all the steel walls and the Tang dynasty soldiers in a 1,000-meter radius around him were blown several dozen li into the air by a terrifying energy. Thick smoke billowed and dust filled the sky. At that moment, the huge sound even overshadowed all the fighting on the battlefield. The originally fierce battlefield suddenly became much quieter. On the west side of Talas, beneath the 4 black war banners, even though they had mentally prepared themselves, Abu Muslim, Osman, and Ibak couldn't help but widen their eyes in shock. With a single strike of his sword, the governor of war had left a massive gap more than 2,000 meters long in the impenetrable defense line of the Tang dynasty. This attack had far surpassed the power of the several hundred silver war machines, and it had opened a path for the army in the rear that was nigh impossible to close. This attack had completely altered the structure of the battlefield. Not only that, even though his attack had caused massive destruction, everyone sensed that Qutayba had not used his full strength in this attack. 700 feet and more than 400 steel walls, each weighing 10,000 jin. Qutayba is actually this powerful. Chapter 1070. Ziyad had never met the governor of war in his life, and his understanding of him was limited to legends. However, the governor of Iron and Blood, Abu Muslim, had met him several times in front of the caliph. When he thought of his previous proposal, Ziyad suddenly understood why Abu Muslim, Osman, and Mamluk leader Ibak were so indifferent. Qutayba's strength had already surpassed the imagination of mortals. When a person reached a certain level of strength, they were confident in controlling the battlefield and didn't need the help of others. In the distance, Ziyad's group was far more shocked than anyone could imagine. As one of the 4 commanders of Talas, Wang Yan had also never imagined that this barbarian general of the Western Kingdom would possess such terrifying strength. Barbarian of the West, hand over your life. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, an earth-shattering roar rang out. Before the billowing smoke and dust had even dissipated, Wang Yan, who had transformed into the mighty miracle god, roared and took the initiative to attack. Bang! Winds howled through the air, and in a flash of light, a steely fist the size of a mountain, suffused with immense power, smashed toward the steel walls of Qutayba. But a moment later, clang! The droning of a sword once more resounded over the front lines. At that moment, even time seemed to have stopped. Buzz! Qutayba's eyes flashed with cold light as he gripped the golden sword, God's might, with both hands and swung it at the mighty miracle god. Bang! In a flash of light in front of the first defense line, Qutayba's figure vanished from the ground. When he reappeared, he was in front of the mighty miracle god, his sword slashing at the mighty miracle god's body. Rumble! The earth quaked and the heavens swayed. Under countless incredulous gazes, the mighty miracle god's massive body seemed to be struck by Qutayba's casual strike. His massive body was thrown into the air like a severed kite, crashing into the army several thousand feet away. Ah! There was a heaven-shaking boom and countless screams as the hundreds of Tang dynasty soldiers behind the defense line were instantly pulverized by the mighty miracle god, their severed limbs flying through the air. And the enormous strength the governor of war had imbued the mighty miracle god's body stirred up a cloud of dust, leaving the earth in ruins. In just 2 attacks, the first had completely broken through the Tang dynasty's defenses, and the second had used its overwhelming strength to thoroughly defeat a great general of the Tang dynasty. Qutaybah's terrifying strength was on full display in these two attacks. Incomparable shock. The entire army was silent, all of them stunned by Qutaybah's strength. And none of them had expected that Wang Yan and the mighty miracle god, who had gathered the strength of so many soldiers, would not even be able to take a single blow from the Arab governor. Father! Wang Chong's eyes went red at this sight. Before the battle, Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Gao Xianji, and Cheng Qianli had run simulations of the battle, and after the battle, each of them had been assigned a defensive region. But Wang Chong had never imagined that the Arab governor would be so powerful that he could heavily injure his father with a single blow. Stop! Wang Chong bellowed, gathering stellar energy under his feet as he lunged at the governor of war. Infidel of the East, die! The governor of war stood in the center of the battlefield, his eyes cold and his expression callous. Without the slightest hesitation, Qutaybah gripped his sword with both hands and slashed at the fallen mighty miracle god. With Qutaybah's terrifying strength, Wang Yan was doomed to die from this blow. Not good. Elder Fang and Elder Du were alarmed by this sight. As Qutaybah leaped into the air and slashed down like a bolt of lightning, the two of them immediately lunged at him. Of Gao Xianji, Wang Chong, Cheng Qianli, and Wang Yan was the weakest. Thus, before the battle, Elder Fang and Elder Du had assigned their expertise in formations to Wang Yan to assist him from the side. Unexpectedly, Elder Fang and Elder Du had become the two closest to Wang Yan and the ones most capable of saving him. Boom, boom, boom. In the blink of an eye, Elder Fang and Elder Du soared into the air, and with a wave of their sleeves, the steel walls that Qutaybah had sent flying immediately began to rise from the ground. Under the control of the pair, these walls began to bombard the ground around Qutaybah like cannonballs. 1 wall, 2 walls, 3 walls, 4 walls. The two worked together, and in the blink of an eye, 8 massive steel walls had descended around Qutaybah, embedding themselves deep into the earth. Bzz. The moment the formation took shape, Qutaybah vanished in a flash of light. Wonderful! Milord, let's go! The two rejoiced and breathed sighs of relief as they swiftly lunged at the distant Wang Yan. The 4 symbols yin-yang soul trap was their most ancient formation technique, and they had relied on this technique to trap many formidable individuals, including Dian Mangpoch. At this moment, this formation had won Wang Yan a chance at survival. However, before the two of them could take more than a few steps forward, there was a sudden rumble and the ground split open. The 4 symbols yin-yang soul trap that Fang and Du had set up behind them instantly shattered. Right in the middle of the formation, a terrifying sword chi split into 2 and flew out. With just a single strike, it immediately caught up to Fang Tian and Du Xing. The sword chi slashed down at the same time, and the expressions on the faces of the two instantly froze. They were split into 2 by the sword chi and fell to the ground. Elder Fang! Elder Du! Everyone's eyes went red at this sight. The 4,000 Wushang cavalry in particular had their eyes bulging out of their sockets in rage. Elder Fang and Elder Du had extremely high statuses in Wushang village, and they had watched many of the Wushang cavalry grow up. No one had expected them to be killed on the battlefield like this. In a flash, countless Wushang cavalry began to gallop in that direction. Jumping clowns! The governor of war, Qutaybah, gripped his sword with both hands as he stepped out of the formation. The formations of the East truly were special, but there was nothing that Qutaybah could not cleave apart with a single strike of his sword. Just when Qutaybah was preparing to continue his pursuit of Wang Yan and kill one of the enemy commanders, a shrill howl of grief and indignation came from above him. Just as the voice rang in his ears, a huge Vajra energy pestle suddenly smashed down from above his head with the speed of a thunderbolt. Buzz! Qutaybah narrowed his eyes, a hint of surprise finally appearing on his face. This Tang Dynasty commander was clearly stronger than the Tang Dynasty commander he had defeated before. But Qutaybah quickly snorted and sneered. Bang! The massive Vajra pestle smashed into Qutaybah's body, but the expected scene of flesh and blood flying through the air did not occur. As everyone watched, The Vajra pestle that Wang Chong had unleashed in his God King Yama suddenly froze in place when it was still several feet from the ground. How could this be? Wang Chong, in his God King Yama form, looked down from above, and when he saw this sight, his mind was in turmoil. Wang Chong had put all his strength into this attack, but he had never imagined that Kuteba would be able to completely block it. Kuteba raised his head and stared at Wang Chong's Yama, a cruel smile in his eyes. At this moment, everyone could clearly see that Kuteba had thrust his massive sword into the ground. He had only used the broad blade of his blade to block Wang Chong's dreadful attack. A moment later, Kuteba pulled out his sword with both hands, unleashing a storm of energy that swept through the world. Bang! No one saw how Kuteba had attacked. By the time they realized what had happened, all they saw was a massive wave of sword chi shrouded in golden light slashing at the God King Yama. Boom! Even with the protection of the karmic battle armor, Wang Chong's energy was still in turmoil, and his God King Yama was sent skidding through the air, his feet digging 2 deep furrows in the ground. Buzz! Kuteba's eyes flashed with cold light, and just when he was about to pursue, he suddenly sensed something and raised his head. In a flash, his pitch-black eyes flashed with light, clearly reflecting 2 figures, one large and one small. Bang! Long before Kuteba could strike, the sky darkened as a dreadful bolt of sword chi shot down from the heavens like a waterfall of stars. At the end of the sword chi, one could clearly see a figure. It was Gao Xianji. Wang Chong, I've come to help you. At almost the same moment that Gao Xianji attacked, a massive fist wrapped in 10-some chains of stellar energy slammed into Kuteba's body with the speed of a thunderbolt. Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli, the 2 commanders of the Anxi army, had also attacked. Rumble! Bolts of energy shot out in all directions as boundless stellar energy swept through the surroundings. This wave of energy was incredibly fierce, far more powerful than any of the previous ones, and the dust and energy engulfed Kuteba's body. Whoosh! Chapter 1071. Bang! The tens of thousands of Arab cavalry in front of the first defense line exploded with cheers when they saw that dazzling golden light and immovable godlike figure in the center of the battlefield. Kuteba! 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 All the hundreds of thousands of elite Tang cavalry on the battlefield who saw this sight felt their blood boil with excitement. Rumble! With this momentum, the hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry surged through the gap that Kuteba had opened. Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, and the others paled at this sight. Everyone hear my order. Gao Xianji's voice resounded over the battlefield. At the same time, Gao Xianji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Chong, and Wang Yan all charged at Kuteba, the Arab war god. Even though the Khorasani had described his power in detail in their letter, it was only when they actually clashed that Wang Chong and the others realized just how powerful he was. Ballista soldiers, fire. Aim for the gap. Mo saber soldiers, prepare to enter the field. Wang Chong's eyes were red and his scalp felt like it was going to explode. For the first time, he sensed an unprecedented danger. But there was no time to think. Wang Chong immediately flew forward, joining forces with Gao Xianji and the others to attack Kuteba. The Arab governor of war was the source of all this danger. If they didn't think of a way to kill him or stop him, then even if they managed to block the gap and kill the Arab cavalry charging in, they would not be able to change the situation. Boom, boom, boom. Vajra pestle, stellar energy chains, sword chi, steel fists, all sorts of attacks rained down on Kuteba. The combined strength of the 4 of them was enough to make anyone pale in fright, enough to make any great general flee 1,000 li. But the Arab governor of war was able to block all these attacks. Clang, clang, clang. The golden sword in Kuteba's hand moved with incredible speed. Whether blocking, or slashing, none of the attacks managed to get close to his body. 1 against 4, Kuteba still had the strength to counterattack. This terrifying power gave everyone an unprecedented shock, and the shock in Wang Chong's heart was greater than anyone else's. The Battle of Talas had changed many things. This was the first time in Wang Chong's life that he had clashed with the Arab governor of war. If he hadn't intervened in the Battle of Talas, Wang Chong would have never even heard of the name Kuteba. Too strong. His strength had already surpassed the peak great general level and reached an even more subtle level. I didn't think that the Arabian Empire would have such a powerful opponent. At this moment, Wang Chang's heart rose and fell, and the degree of shock was indescribable. Marquis, we are here to help you. At the most intense moment of the battle, the thundering of hooves could be heard. On the other side, the 4,000 Wushang cavalry were charging with astonishing speed toward the godlike figure of Qutayba. Cutting formation. With a shout, the 4,000-some Wushang cavalry immediately began to scatter into dozens of columns that scattered in every direction. The cutting formation was a branch of the 10 charges 10 victories formation, and it was a special formation used to deal with extremely powerful opponents. Stop! As the Wushang cavalry galloped toward him, Wang Chang's eyes bulged in shock. Qutayba was far stronger than he had imagined. An ordinary cutting formation would not be able to deal with him. The Wushang cavalry were strong enough to deal with brigadier generals and even ordinary great generals, but Qutayba's strength far surpassed this level. Even though Wang Chong had called out to stop him, it was too late. The deaths of elders Fang and Du had agitated all the Wushang cavalry, their eyes red and their bodies seething with rage. Kill! Avenge the elders! Countless Wushang cavalry galloped forward with bloodshot eyes. As thousands of soldiers watched, one Wushang cavalry after another took to the air and charged toward Qutayba. In a few short moments, 40 to 50 Wushang cavalry had charged toward Qutayba. Buzz! Qutayba was fighting 1 against 4 on the battlefield when he suddenly heard this neigh. His eyes flashed with cold light as he turned his head. Boom! Qutayba hovered in the air, his other hand reaching out and aiming at the charging Wushang cavalry. In a flash, a vast sea of stellar energy surged out of Qutayba's body and swept through the air. A second later, everyone was stunned by what they saw. Qutayba held his sword with one hand to stop 4 great generals while his other hand blocked the attacks of the Wushang cavalry. One Wushang cavalry after another rose into the air, but it was like they had charged into a swamp, frozen in the air by Qutayba's terrifying stellar energy. 1, 2, 3, 4, several hundred Wushang cavalry were frozen in the air, unable to move. Even his allies, Osman, Abu Muslim, and Ibak, couldn't help but gasp at this sight. They knew that Qutayba was strong, but none of them had expected him to be this strong. This was not something that could be described with just the word, strong. Not even Abu Muslim wearing the eye of the demon god would be able to explode with such power. Although this fellow is arrogant, he's unbelievably strong. Osman looked into the distance, his mind reeling in shock. In the past, he had been somewhat unconvinced that Qutayba had been called the Arab war god, but now he had nothing to say. Absolute strength was the absolute truth. With his godly strength, Qutayba had the right to be looked up to by anyone. Bang! At the same time, there was a massive boom in the distance, and in the blink of an eye, the Wushang horseman closest to Qutayba was blown to smithereens through the chinks in his armor. That meteoric metal armor was twisted into a ball in Qutayba's hands, and then a second, a third, a fourth. As countless people watched, more than 100 Wushang cavalry were pulverized, leaving behind empty shells of meteoric metal that floated in the air and clattered to the ground. Bastard! A thunderous roar shook the heavens and the earth. In that instant, there was a flash of light, and Li Sai leaped into the air atop the Fergana stallion. The giant Uzun sword in his hand slashed down, cutting into Qutayba's thick stellar energy. Someone of Li Sai's strength should have never been able to threaten a powerful Arab war god like Qutayba. But at this moment, Qutayba was fighting 1 against 4, holding back 4 Tang dynasty great generals while single-handedly holding back several hundred Wushang horsemen. He was using almost all of his strength, but Li Sai's appearance had completely shattered this balance. Like the last straw on the camel's back, the ripples began to spread out from Li Sai's giant sword. As for Li Sai's giant sword, it was like he was cutting a cake, slowly cutting through Qutayba's thick stellar energy. Buzz! The governor of war, Qutayba, who had remained calm and composed even if Mount Tai were to collapse, finally showed a slight tinge of emotion. Let me! Just when the governor of war was about to reach his limit, a massive metal axe appeared and slashed at Kataba's protective stellar energy with a momentum that seemed capable of cleaving apart the heavens. At this moment, the Ganka king finally joined the assault on the governor of war. "Me too. Count me in. Let's see just how strong you are." In the blink of an eye, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, and the leader of the Farahan tribe, Banahan, leaped into the air like cannonballs and joined the battle. Kataba's face contorted, and he finally found it difficult to maintain his composure. Even though he was extremely strong, far stronger than Abu Muslim and the others, he could not endure the attacks of so many great generals and brigadier generals. Boom! Without the slightest hesitation, Qutayba began to circulate all the stellar energy in his body, causing boundless energy to erupt from his body. Boom boom boom. With one heaven-shaking explosion after another, boundless waves of energy began to ripple out from Qutayba's body. Wang Chong, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, Li Sai, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, and the others were all sent flying like ragdolls, crashing into the ground in a cloud of dust. At the same time, countless Wushang cavalry were sent flying along with their horses. In a flash, a radius of several hundred feet around Qutayba was filled with figures. After sending so many experts flying, the golden light around the invincible war god Qutayba had dimmed a little, and his face was a little pale. Although Qutayba was called the war god, he was not a true god. Dealing with so many people at once had consumed a significant amount of stellar energy. Buzz! Qutayba's eyes flashed with cold light as he gripped his sword with both hands and leaped into the air. Without the slightest hesitation, he slashed at Gao Xianxi. Of the 4 commanders of the Tang dynasty, Qutayba could tell at a glance that Gao Xianxi was the strongest and the greatest threat. Unlike Abu Muslim and Osman, he had little interest in the weak. Only killing the strongest could arouse his interest. But while Qutayba had moved quickly, Wang Chong had moved even faster. As Qutayba leaped into the air, a figure suddenly rose from the ground, and before the figure had even arrived, a massive Vajra pestle was already thrusting toward Qutayba. The God King Yama's massive body was an enormous advantage. No matter how fast Qutayba was, he could not move as fast as a casual movement of the God King Yama. Buzz! Chapter 1072. This young Eastern commander had recovered much faster than Qutayba had predicted. Qutayba's stellar energy explosion had very little effect on him. Although he was surprised, Qutayba quickly returned to normal. The massive sword in his hand suddenly changed direction and slashed at the black Vajra pestle. Boom! Wang Chang's Vajra pestle was incapable of withstanding the weight of this blow and was instantly pulverized by Qutayba's sword. But this blow had also won them a rare moment of respite. Lord Gao, attack his back. Lord Cheng, attack his upper body and use the chains to restrain his movements. Father, attack his left shoulder. I'll deal with the front. Wang Chong issued a string of orders, and before he could finish speaking, Wang Chong had already risen from the ground, his Vajra pestle forming once more as he took the lead in attacking Qutayba. Qutayba truly was powerful, but Wang Chong had the karmic battle armor, which nullified a significant portion of Qutayba's attacks. Thus, even though Wang Chong wasn't the strongest of the 4, his defensive abilities were far superior. He was the only person in this battle who could stop Qutayba's attacks. Bang! With Wang Chong's attack, the rhythm of the battle suddenly changed. The 4 Tang dynasty great generals were working together, exerting even more pressure on Qutayba. Yama's Fury. Giant Spirit Strike. 6 Ultimate Majesty's God Art. Desolate Shackles. The 4 great generals were putting all their power into this battle. Banahan, King Ganka, Shi Yuanqing, pay attention to the golden sword in his hand. The rest of you support him from the side and do everything in your power to restrain it. Wang Chong issued a string of orders, and the battle was extremely intense. When Wang Chong gave his last order, the 4 great generals immediately switched tactics, shifting their focus from Qutayba to the giant sword in his hand. A subtle change occurred in the battle. Great Fire Crow Art. 3-star Chi Condensation Art. Beast God Strike. The 4 brigadier generals poured all their power into attacking Qutayba's God's Might sword. Qutayba was extremely powerful, and in normal times he would have killed the king of Gonka with a single blow of his sword. But right now, the majority of Qutayba's strength was being held down by Wang Chong's group. More importantly, just as Wang Chong had predicted, Qutayba needed the god's might of his giant sword to display its full power. With the giant sword restrained, Qutayba's strength was greatly reduced. Bastard! Qutayba's eyes flashed with cold light as he turned his head from Gao Xianji to Wang Chong. Wang Chong's strength wasn't the highest, but the effect of his wisdom in this battle was far more important than his strength. With this minor adjustment in tactics, Wang Chong was able to disrupt Qutayba's rhythm. To Qutayba, this was truly fatal. Ignorant Junior, I'll kill you first, and then I'll kill the others. Qutayba's eyes flashed with cold light. Clang. With a heaven-shaking sword cry, Qutayba raised an arm and pointed the god's might sword at the heavens. A moment later, the world rumbled as a dazzling golden sword chi soared into the sky, and Qutayba's aura swelled to a new level. Careful! Wang Chongduch. Not good. Get out of the way. Gao Xianji and the others immediately sensed danger and grimaced. In a flash, the three of them put all their strength into attacking Qutayba. But even so, their attacks were still too slow. Kakrek. There was a massive boom as Qutayba's massive golden sword, connected to the golden sword chi, transformed into a majestic bolt of golden lightning. Wreathed in destructive flames, it slashed at the god King Yama. Right before everyone's eyes, there was a cracking sound, and an extremely thin black line instantly appeared on the mountain-like god King Yama from head to toe. Then, with a loud rumble, it split into two halves, exploding into countless fragments. A sorrowful and indignant roar resounded through the heavens, and the eyes of all the Wushang cavalry turned red. Rumble! The thousands of Wushang cavalry madly leaped into the air and charged at Qutayba. Boom boom boom! The thousands of Wushang cavalry rammed into the thick stellar energy around Qutayba's body. In the past, they would have found it very difficult to succeed so easily, but in order to kill Wang Chong, Qutayba had used his supreme sword chi technique, revealing a sliver of an opening. Even Qutayba's thick stellar energy was rapidly weakening under this barrage of attacks. But even so, Qutayba remained as composed as ever, using his powerful stellar energy to resist the attacks of the Wushang cavalry. A bunch of ants. After smoothly killing a Tang dynasty commander, Qutayba's expression was cold as he turned to deal with the Wushang cavalry behind him. A moment later, the unthinkable occurred. Bang! In an inconspicuous place on the ground, a slender figure slammed a hand against the ground and shot through the air like a swallow, arcing through the air like a bolt of lightning toward the dazzling son of Qutayba. Great distortion art! Wang Chong's roar resounded through the world, and without the slightest hesitation, a majestic bolt of stellar energy exploded out of his body like a bolt of lightning. The air twisted as a 3-foot-long Wuzi steel sword wrapped in terrifying energy slammed into the stellar energy around Qutayba's body. Rumble, 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 rumble. Under the gazes of countless people, an inconceivable scene occurred. Even someone of Qutayba's cultivation level and strength was unable to withstand Wang Chong's great distortion art. His steel wall of stellar energy began to ripple, twist, and blur, and Wang Chong's great distortion art was even able to force a small crack in the stellar energy. And Wang Chong's Wuzi steel sword shot through this crack. In the air, Qutayba's expression flickered, and he suddenly turned his head, a look of shock appearing on his aloof face for the first time. The god King Yama had died, but Wang Chong had not. This in itself was astonishing. But even more astonishing was that after losing the god King Yama's avatar, Wang Chong had fallen back to the peak brigadier general level. There was still a massive gap between him and Qutayba. But even in this state, Wang Chong had been able to use the great distortion art to tear through Qutayba's stronger defenses. Wang Chong had been preparing for this assassination for a very long time. By the time Qutayba realized what was happening, Wang Chong's Wuzi steel sword had already pierced through the layers of stellar energy and was only half an inch away from Qutayba's back. But at this distance, Qutayba's body exploded with majestic stellar energy, forming an impenetrable fortress in front of Wang Chang's woozy steel sword and firmly blocking Wang Chang's attack. Everyone, attack with all your strength. Stop him. Gao Xinji and the others also put all their strength into a torrent of stellar energy that rumbled toward Kateba. In the blink of an eye, 3 streams of stellar energy had connected with Kateba, and the battle between them and Kateba had instantly turned from a vicious brawl to an even more dangerous battle of stellar energy. This was also the method that Gao Xinji had hastily thought up to hold down Kateba. Infidel, you're seeking death. Kateba's body remained frozen in the air, firmly resisting the attacks of Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, and Banahan. But Kateba's cold gaze remained fixed on Wang Chong. War God Barrier. This was one of the supreme techniques that Kateba had relied on to shock the world. Although it was only a thin layer, it was impregnable. Kateba had fought against many opponents in his life, but none of them had been able to break through his War God Barrier. I will have you and the empire behind you slowly taste the taste of despair. Kateba's eyes were disdainful and his expression dignified. Even in the face of this dangerous clash of stellar energy, he remained calm and composed. As a war god who had been tempered through blood and fire, there were very few things in the world that could shake him. Is that so? Wang Chong suddenly raised his head and spoke in Arabic. Buzz. Kateba's pupils constricted and his face paled. You actually know how to speak our language. Kateba stared at Wang Chong, a hint of shock in his eyes. Wang Chong did not answer, only coldly smiled. His body exploded with stellar energy as he activated the great distortion art. At the same time, the stellar energy in his body trembled as he madly attacked Kateba. It's useless, ignorant ant. You know nothing of power. Kateba quickly regained his composure and looked down at Wang Chong, making no attempt to hide his disdain. This Eastern world was destined to require his pacification, and the conquest that Abu Muslim could not accomplish would require Kateba. Let me grant you death. Just when Kateba was preparing to end the battle, something unexpected occurred. Boom. There was a heaven-shaking boom as Wang Chang's woozy steel sword, which had been blocked by Kateba, suddenly used an extremely bizarre and inexplicable method to pierce through Kateba's impregnable war god barrier, its sharp sword chi stabbing toward Kateba's vitals. It was as fast as a bolt of lightning. Buzz. Kateba's face paled, and he had no time to think. A peerless and unyielding stellar energy erupted from his body. At the same time, Kateba's body shifted as he used a palm to block Wang Chang's wood steel sword. When everything stopped, Wang Chang's woozy steel sword stopped a foot in front of Kateba, unable to advance any further. Far away from the woozy steel sword was a powerful golden palm. In the end, Wang Chang's all-out attack was still unable to break through Kateba's defense. But a moment later, an almost imperceptible red wound appeared on Kateba's palm, and then a drop of blood fell from his palm, passing through the air to fall to the ground. This seemingly insignificant development instantly shattered the silence. In the air, the calm and composed Kateba, who had been looking down on the crowd like a god, suddenly began to ripple, and for the first time, a look of extreme shock appeared in his cold and aloof eyes. Blood. Chapter 1074. Unforgivable. Kateba raised his head and stared at Wang Chong, his entire body exploding with a dreadful killing intent. Bang! Destructive stellar energy erupted from Kateba's body like an erupting volcano, sweeping through the battlefield like a storm. Thud-thud-thud. Wang Chong, Wang Yan, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, and even Banahan Shiyuanqing, Lu Shi, and Li Sai were all sent flying like ragdolls to the ground. Plush! The moment his body hit the ground, Wang Chong's body trembled and he vomited blood. Too powerful! Wang Chong struggled to his feet, his eyes gloomy as he stared at that figure in the sky. Kateba's strength had already surpassed his imagination. The 4 of them were simply incapable of stopping him. In the air, Kateba's killing intent surged, and the area 100 feet around him began to twist and distort. Bang! In a flash of golden light, Kateba gripped his sword with both hands and slashed it through the air, his target clearly Wang Chong. Kataba's hate-filled attack was as swift as a bolt of lightning. Before anyone could react, the sword was already upon Wang Chong's face. With Kataba's terrifying strength, if this attack struck, Wang Chong would be doomed. Marquis! Milord! Chonga! The eyes of the Wushang cavalry and Qixi protectorate went red, and Gao Xianji and the others felt like their insides were aflame. But all of them had been injured in the battle with Kataba. Even though they could see this, they were powerless to save Wang Chong. Just when Wang Chong was about to lose his life to Kataba's sword, the situation suddenly changed. Stop! An aged roar exploded from afar, like a landslide or a tsunami. In the blink of an eye, origin energy went berserk. As countless people watched in shock, the origin energy of the world converged into an origin energy storm, wreathed in destructive energy, that appeared in front of Wang Chong and slammed into Kataba. The appearance of this storm was very abrupt. As the storm spun, it emitted bursts of heart-palpitating rumbling sounds. Even the void seemed to be unable to withstand this enormous force. It emitted sizzling sounds as a series of dents appeared. Kataba's eyes chilled at the sight of this origin energy storm. Instead of dodging, he stepped forward and slashed at the origin energy storm. Rumble! In a flash of golden light, the origin energy storm that had appeared out of nowhere was cleaved in two by Kataba's sword and dissipated into the air. As the origin energy storm dissipated, Kataba was finally able to see what had happened behind it. In the air, the azure hand condensed from origin energy was dragging Wang Chong back. Even someone as experienced as Kataba couldn't help but widen his eyes at this unprecedented sight, and a hint of solemnity appeared on his face. But Kataba quickly reacted, his eyes even colder and harsher than before. Do you think you can escape from me? Kataba gripped his sword with both hands and unleashed another mighty slash at Wang Chong with the momentum of a thunderbolt. Kataba had spent his entire life fighting, and ever since he had taken the position of governor of war, he had never been defeated, much less injured. But Wang Chong had not only injured him, but also pierced his palm, causing him to bleed a drop of precious blood on the battlefield. This was something that Kataba could not tolerate. No matter what, he had to die. Boom! Sword chi whistled through the air, causing the entire world to wail in fear at the might of Kataba's sword. Although he was also an imperial great general, Kataba was far more powerful than any mortal could imagine. Just when it seemed like Wang Chong was about to lose his life to Kataba's sword, there was a flash of light, and then a figure charged into Kataba's sword with astonishing speed. Who goes there? How dare you injure my disciple? An old roar filled with rage erupted. At the same time, a terrifying fist force that shook the heavens and the earth, like a landslide or tsunami, also erupted. Boom! No one could describe this explosion. The entire world seemed to explode, the shockwaves rising nearly 1,000 feet into the air, even suppressing the battlefield that was several dozen feet wide. When all of this dissipated, Kataba stood with his sword in both hands, radiating golden light. His opponent was a black-robed, white-haired elder in a loose robe who was shielding Wang Chong behind him, his eyes blazing with rage. In that instant, the surroundings were silent, and even time seemed to have stopped. Just who are you? You were actually able to receive a full-strength attack from me. Kataba stared at the nearby black-robed elder, his expression grave as if he was facing a powerful foe. Kataba had fought for decades and had always been undefeatable. No one had ever been able to rely on a pair of bare fists to receive a full-strength blow from his giant sword, God's might. Where did this uncivilized barbarian come from that dares to act so atrociously in front of this old man? The evil emperor stood in front of Wang Chong, his hair and beard dancing in the wind, his entire body seething with rage. Silence. Absolute silence. Whether it was the governor of war or the demonic emperor old man, neither of them could understand what the other was saying, but the two continued to oppose each other, neither willing to back down. Kataba's pupils constricted as he stared at the demonic emperor old man like needles, sizing him up in search of a weakness. But even as his hands gripped God's might, he still did not attack. The governor of war had never feared battle, nor did he fear battle. The stronger the enemy, the more interested he became. But this time, Kuteba did not attack as recklessly as he usually did. For the first time, he had encountered an opponent of unfathomable strength that was difficult to deal with. Very difficult to deal with, Kuteba thought to himself as he stared at the evil emperor. As Kuteba was examining the evil emperor was also examining Kuteba, an extremely powerful barbarian. This was the evil emperor's first thought. The martial arts of the Central Plains were flourishing, and the various sects were filled with heroes and experts. Although there were formidable experts outside the Central Plains, the majority of them were equivalent to sect masters. Very few of them were as powerful as this barbarian wearing golden armor. The evil emperor could sense that this barbarian had at least touched upon that subtle realm of cultivation. This was simply inconceivable to the evil emperor. Master, be careful. This person is called Kuteba, the Arab war god. A feeble voice sounded from behind him. Wang Chong supported himself with his hand, and with great difficulty he raised his body. Kuteba was simply too powerful, and the only person who could deal with him was his master, the evil emperor. At the peak of his power, his master had been one of the strongest martial artists of the Central Plains, the strongest of the Tang dynasty's forces. If not even his master could deal with Kuteba, then Kuteba would truly be invincible. Chong, there's no need to worry. Leave this person to me. The evil emperor did not even turn his head as he stared at Kuteba. The evil emperor wanted to fight with Kuteba, but he had a rather apprehensive look on his face. If he were alone, the evil emperor would have already attacked, but in Wang Chong's current condition, the two of them were likely to be caught up in the shockwaves. In this situation, the evil emperor simply could not fight with his full strength. Just as their auras surged and they were about to attack each other, before they could do so, dong. War drums began to beat, and at the same time, to the east of Talas, the earth quaked, dust churned, and the sounds of fighting shook the heavens. Countless soldiers were now charging toward Talas. The army had yet to appear, but above the smoke and dust, spirit chi shot up into the sky. Under the influence of an invisible force, the air was distorted, and huge sabers, axes, and swords appeared in the air. The aura was astonishing. Kill! Battle cries shook the heavens. On the eastern side of Talas, there was a flash of light as the fully armored Tang dynasty soldiers charged over the hills like a storm, surging toward the battlefield like a tide. What's going on here? Beneath the Black War banner, Ziad's eyes widened at this sight. Arabia had more than 400,000 elite soldiers. If these were just ordinary reinforcements, someone of Ziad's strength wouldn't have cared, but these soldiers gave him the feeling that they were on par with Gao Xinji's Iron Wall army. If that was all there was to it, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But what shocked Ziad the most was that there were tens of thousands of soldiers like the Iron Wall army, at least 20 to 30,000, perhaps even more. How could this be? At this moment, even Governor Osman couldn't help but grimace. He had originally believed that he understood the Tang dynasty, but it now appeared that the Tang dynasty was far stronger than he had imagined. Everyone follow me. On a high hill, a black warhorse with a white rhombus-shaped mark on its forehead stood out like a sore thumb. Wang Chong's second brother, Wang Bei, was riding on his horse. When he saw this sight, his eyes went red and his blood began to boil as he charged down the hill. Kill! Behind Wang Bei, everyone was seething with rage as they stared at the distant Arab army surging through the gap in the steel wall like a bolt of lightning. The Divine Martial Army, the Dragon Stallion Army, the Roaring Tiger Army, the Xuanwu Army, the Divine Prison Army, all the elite soldiers of the Tang dynasty were surging toward the battlefield. Although there were only 60,000 of them, the energy they exuded was enough to topple mountains and overturn seas, even surpassing that of the Arab army. Mo Saber Unit, move out. But the first to move out were not the elite reinforcements like the Divine Martial Army or the Dragon Stallion Army, but the Mo Saber Unit at the rear of the battlefield. Boom! Chapter 1075. Boom, boom, boom. Step by step, the 10,000 soldiers of the Mo Saber Squadron advanced rapidly. Their aura gave the impression that they were unstoppable and unstoppable. It was as if anything that stood in their way would be pulverized into powder. The MO Sabre unit advanced with incredible speed, and it only took a few moments for them to reach the area where the battle was most intense. Boom! The MO Sabre soldier at the very front brandished his 7-foot-long saber and fiercely slashed at an Arab horseman charging at him. The neighing of a warhorse resounded through the air, and the moment the Arab horseman raised his scimitar, a long saber slashed down, cleaving the horseman and his horse in two. At almost the same time, screams filled the air as the tens of thousands of MO Sabre soldiers brandished their MO sabers and used a tyrannical method to cut down the Arab soldiers in front of them. Horses crashed to the ground as several thousand Arab corpses appeared on the battlefield. And this was only the prelude to the MO Sabre unit's assault. Mountain! The 10,000 MO Sabre soldiers roared in unison, gripping their scimitars with both hands and holding them close to their chests as they strode forward. Boom! As the second wave of Arab cavalry arrived, the 10,000 MO Sabre soldiers attacked once more. With a single slash of their sabers, nearly 10,000 Arab soldiers were cut down. Dust billowed into the air, but the MO Sabre unit was still advancing. Lin! With a loud roar, the MO Sabre soldiers once more pushed forward like a wall, their momentum surging like the tide, unstoppable and vast. Boom! Another wave of Arab soldiers whinnied as they fell beneath the MO Sabre unit, their blood splashing across the ground. But the MO Sabre unit was still advancing, picking up speed. Wind! In another round, the MO Sabre unit cut down tens of thousands of Arab soldiers, and yet it did not slow down in the slightest. It was like nothing in the world could stop them. Either the enemy would be killed or the MO Sabre squad would be killed. There was absolutely no third outcome. The long blades of the MO Sabre unit fully displayed their advantage. As the saying went, an inch longer was an inch stronger, and the MO Sabres were designed for hacking and slashing. Before the Arab soldiers could attack, the MO Sabre unit had already seized the opportunity to strike. Fire! The MO Sabre squad kept sheathing their sabers, unsheathing their sabers, hacking and slashing down ruthlessly. Wherever they passed, corpses would fall to the ground one after another. The MO Sabre squad's momentum was like a rainbow, and with the support of this momentum, their speed became faster and their momentum became stronger and stronger. Finally, retreat! Retreat! As the Arab horsemen saw the dreadful aura of the MO Sabre unit, fear finally appeared in their eyes. The massive lethality of the Great Sabre Squadron was secondary. When tens of thousands of people pushed forward like a wall, that terrifying momentum made everyone feel a bone-chilling chill. It seemed like no matter how many people they charged, no matter how many times they charged, they would be of no use against the soldiers of the Tang dynasty. They wouldn't even be able to slow down their advance. As long as they could still defeat their foes, no one would retreat. But when they felt that victory was hopeless, that was when everyone began to feel fear. The tens of thousands of warhorses in the neighed in fear. Even these Arab warhorses seemed to be infected by this fear, and they all stopped in their tracks, desperately trying to break free of their reins and escape from the MO Sabre unit. In the rear, the Divine Prison Army, Divine Might Army, and Dragon Stallion Army were surging forward like a tide. Damn it! How could the Tang people have so many powerful reinforcements? An Arab officer in the gap widened his eyes as he mentally clenched his teeth. That dreadful momentum seemed to be able to topple mountains and overturn seas. In all his years serving under the governor of war, he had never seen an enemy like this. Rumble! The Arab soldiers that had charged through the gap were now frightened out of their wits, and in the face of the constant defeats on the front lines, they finally couldn't help but retreat. Boom! At this moment, the horn of retreat came from the distance. The sound of retreat was so sudden that for a moment, the entire battlefield was eerily still. Rumble! The hundreds of thousands of elite Arab soldiers that had been surging toward the first defense line of the Tang dynasty immediately began to move even faster toward the western side of Talas. Kaio! Joy had come so suddenly that everyone was left dumbfounded. In a flash, countless soldiers surged in the direction the Arabs had retreated. Bastard! At this moment, no one was more stunned than the governor of war, Qutayba, who was hovering in the air, leaning on his sword as he fought against the evil emperor. Just when he was actively searching for a weakness on the evil emperor's body and preparing to fight, the army had completely retreated. As he stared at the unmoving and unfathomable evil emperor, then at the storm of energy in the distance, and then at the slowly recovering Wang Chong, Cheng Qianli, Wang Yan, and Gao Xianji, Kuteba clenched his teeth and finally made his choice. Tang people, we will meet again. Kuteba stared at the demonic emperor old man in front of him, and his body swayed as he finally chose to retreat. In his battle with Wang Chong and the Wushang cavalry, Kuteba had consumed far too much stellar energy. In this state, Kuteba was not confident that he could defeat the evil emperor. Bang! In a flash of light, Kuteba transformed into a streak of golden light, leaving a long trail in the air as he vanished into the distance. How was it? A familiar voice, incomparably old, came from beside his ear. In the wind, Chief of Wushang, leaning on his cane, appeared at the evil emperor's side like a ghost, his eyes fixed on the direction Kuteba had left in. He was still a little slower than the evil emperor, who cultivated the myriad spirit sea art and had comprehended the Tao of energy. Even though he was very fast, he had still been delayed by a minor matter and had not been able to make it in time for the battle. That fellow is very strong. I've never encountered such a formidable opponent before. And I'm afraid that he's already touched upon that realm. The evil emperor said. Ah. The chief of Wushang was taken aback, and a grim look appeared on his face as he gazed in the direction Kuteba had left. Both he and the evil emperor were well aware of what it was like to touch upon the peak of the Saint Martial realm. Anyone who could touch that realm was definitely a legendary level powerhouse. Let's not worry about this for now and first help these children. With their strength, it will be rather difficult for them to contend against an expert of that level. The evil emperor quickly turned his gaze to Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli. Although Gao Xianji and Cheng Qianli were illustrious figures in the western regions, and Gao Xianji was an imperial great general and Anxi protector general of the Tang dynasty, the evil emperor was still much older than them. Even Gao Xianji was just a child in front of the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang. The evil emperor appeared next to Gao Xianji, lifted him off the ground, and slapped a palm against his shoulder. In an instant, a thunderous rumbling sound rang out. After that, a violent gust of wind blew, and the air currents surged. Within a radius of several hundred meters, all the heaven and earth yuan qi transformed into a vast ocean, gushing down from the sky, like 100 rivers flowing into the ocean, into Gao Xianji. Not only that, the surging origin energy was so dense that it was almost tangible. Like thousands of galloping horses, it surged into the bodies of Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, Lu Shi, and the others on the ground. Ah! Everyone was dumbfounded by this sight. So powerful! Feeling the increasing strength in their bodies, Cheng Qianli, Shi Yuanqing, and the others stared at the evil emperor in shock. This was the first time they had seen Wang Chong's master, the evil emperor. The two of them were already top-notch martial artists, but the evil emperor's strength had far surpassed their imagination. They had never imagined that someone's understanding and mastery of Yuan Qi energy had reached such a profound level. Compared to them, the Saint Martial Realm experts were as childish as children. What powerful energy! Gao Xianji was standing next to the evil emperor, his body wrapped in thick origin energy. At such a close distance, he could sense this energy far more clearly and intensely than anyone else. The elder next to him was brimming with explosive energy, and Gao Xianji could sense thousands of powerful tornadoes on his body. He had never sensed such terrifying energy from anyone before. It was like a human-shaped storm that had been compressed hundreds of thousands of times. At this moment, he even felt a deep sense of rejoicing that this person was his ally and not his enemy. So this is Wang Chong's backup plan? Just where did he find such a powerful martial artist? Gao Xianji was deeply moved. He believed that he was already very strong, but he was still lacking compared to this elder. If this elder had not appeared in time to stop Kuteba, the consequences would have been unthinkable. It seems like Master's myriad spirit sea art is even more formidable than before. No one was happier than Wang Chong at this moment. Ever since his dantian had been destroyed, his master had been silent for a very long time. But after cultivating the myriad spirit sea art, his master's strength had advanced by leaps and bounds. Every time he saw his master, Wang Chong could sense that his master's myriad spirit sea art was getting stronger and more unfathomable. Even now, Wang Chong couldn't guess what level his master had reached. Chapter 1076. Chong, I'll leave the army to you. Leave the other martial artists to me. The evil emperor looked forward, his eyes flashing with sharp light. He raised a finger, and hundreds of bolts of energy shot forward like arrows at the fleeing Arab cavalry. Boom boom boom. There was a series of explosions as large numbers of Arab cavalry were sent flying several dozen feet away. The Tang dynasty's army roared to life. The 60,000 elite reinforcements, together with the original garrison at Talas and mercenaries, swept toward the Arabs. In a flash, the Arab army was routed, and the Arabs began to flee even faster. Only after pursuing for a very long distance did the Tang dynasty finally sound the gongs to withdraw. Bastard! Abu Muslim, who told you to sound the gongs to withdraw? The army had finally retreated, but this was far from over for the Arabs. Beneath the 4 black banners, Qutayba, dressed in golden armor, was viciously glaring at Abu Muslim's group, his face seething with rage. Qutayba had always been the most warlike person in his life, far more so than anyone else in the Arab army. Just when he was preparing to deal with the evil emperor, Abu Muslim had blown the horn and chosen to retreat. This was something Qutayba could not accept. Buzz! As Qutayba spoke, an icy energy pierced through the air and locked onto Abu Muslim. In a flash, Ibak, Osman, and the others all revealed extremely apprehensive expressions. Qutayba, listen to us. We mean no harm. Governor Osman hurriedly said. I didn't ask you to speak. Qutayba turned his head and glanced at Osman, his cold gaze chilling Osman's heart and making him unable to say anything else. Even though they were all governors, Qutayba was unquestionably the strongest, and after witnessing his terrifying strength, no one dared to fight with this madman. Qutayba, I have no intention of stopping you from fighting. At this moment, the only person who remained calm was Abu Muslim. His expression was relaxed, and even before this publicly acknowledged Arab war god, he showed no fear. Rome wasn't built in a day. There will be plenty of opportunities to fight against the Tang people. Moreover, if you wanted to test their strength, you've probably already achieved your goal. The other side has many reinforcements, for great generals and that old man. You've also been fighting for a long time. Their advantage in numbers might be disadvantageous to you. So, you think I can't beat him? Qutayba narrowed his eyes, his expression turning even colder. As the Arab war god, Qutayba had never lost a single battle in his life, and Abu Muslim's words happened to strike at his taboo. Buzz. Qutayba's words immediately caused the mood to shift. Qutayba truly did have an astonishing aura, but Abu Muslim also appeared to have no intention of backing down. The governor of war and the governor of iron and blood were both supreme existences of the Arabian Empire. The 2 strongest governors standing beneath the 4 black war banners in a standoff made Osman and Ibak very uneasy. Qutayba, calm down. Abu Muslim, don't be impulsive. Ibak was also beginning to panic. The army had originally come east to deal with the Tang people at Talas, but if the situation continued to develop, the more than 400,000 Arab soldiers might start to fight amongst themselves. That's not what I meant. But, Qutayba, don't forget the goal of this eastern expedition. His Majesty the Caliph has decreed that we must sweep through the east and unify the entire eastern world. Abu Muslim sternly said. Unlike Qutayba, who was perhaps obsessed with defeating powerful foes and trampling great generals under his feet, Abu Muslim was more focused on the overall strategic goal. Abu Muslim, on the other hand, was more focused on the overall strategic goal. This was why he had not retreated to Khorasan after the battle, but remained in the Black Forest, waiting for a chance to attack. The world was still and silent, and the air beneath the 4 war banners had dropped to a freezing point. Qutayba stared at Abu Muslim, his eyes seething with killing intent. The god's might on his sword was constantly trembling and buzzing. Everyone around him had nervous expressions, and Ziyad was even standing behind Abu Muslim, his right hand silently gripping the ocean ring around his waist. Gulp. Ziyad's throat slid as he unconsciously swallowed. As one of the best Arab generals, Dade had faced many dangers, but the Qutayba before him was completely different. From a certain perspective, he had reached a completely different level. Even if all the people here worked together, Ziyad still wasn't sure that they could deal with Qutayba. At this moment, the calmest and most composed person was Abu Muslim. His eyes were slightly narrowed, and he was like a pillar in the middle of an ocean, showing no intention of backing down. But after a long while, Qutayba finally loosened his grip on God's might. Abu Muslim's words had been effective, and the caliph's decree had finally overcome Qutayba's madness for war. "I'll leave this matter to you. I'll wait for your final decision." With these words, Qutayba urged his horse forward and rode past the trio, vanishing into the distance. At this moment, Ziyad, Ibak, and Osman all breathed sighs of relief. Only after Qutayba had left did the three of them feel their palms break out in a cold sweat. "Abu Muslim, you were too impulsive. It's not like you don't know Qutayba's personality. If you truly angered him, it would be extremely disadvantageous to all of us." Now that there were no outsiders, Osman, an old friend of many years, finally couldn't help but step forward and advise. "I was truly worried for you just now. Relax. Qutayba isn't as impulsive as all of you imagine. Don't forget that he's still a governor, not an ordinary general." Abu Muslim indifferently said. Others might have viewed Qutayba as a pure war madman, but Abu Muslim knew that a pure war madman could never become the governor of war. "Let's go. I've already received a letter from the Uzun and the Western Turks. They should be arriving soon." Abu Muslim turned his horse around and quickly vanished beneath the 4 black war banners. The two armies had sounded the gongs for retreat. Whether it was the Tang people or the Arabs, both sides had chosen to show restraint. The Tang dynasty had not left the steel defense line to attack, and the Arabs did not have the courage to go around the defense line to continue the war. Once the aftermath of the battle had been dealt with, everyone was gathered in the main hall of the city of Talas, and the atmosphere was extremely solemn. Have the losses been tallied up? How many people did we lose in this battle? Gao Xinji placed his hands on the table and looked at his deputy. "We lost a lot, around 10,000 people. But the Arabs suffered even greater losses, around 80,000 dead, all of them elites." The deputy sternly said. The deputy's words instantly caused the mood in the hall to grow even heavier. It seemed like the Arabs had lost more than the Tang dynasty in this battle, but 10,000 soldiers was no small number to the current Tang dynasty. More importantly, the Tang dynasty had already sent out the Wushang cavalry and Iron Wall army several times, even the Mo saber unit. Even reinforcements had been dispatched. But the Arabs, whether it was the Mamelukes or the other heavyweight elites, had not entered the battle. In contrast, the 80,000 killed number was no longer as dazzling. The mood in the hall was particularly heavy. Everyone lowered their heads in thought, no one saying a word. "That's not what I'm worried about the most right now. That golden-armored Arab governor should be the governor of war that the Khorasani speak of, Qutayba. This person is too powerful. He alone was able to stop the attacks of 4 of us and hold the absolute advantage. If we don't think of a way to deal with this person, it will be very difficult for us to win this battle." Cheng Qianli broke the silence. No one had felt this battle more keenly than the 4 of them. Tens of thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of steel walls, and several great generals had been unable to stop 1 man and 1 sword. Before this, Cheng Qianli had never imagined that there could be such a powerful cultivator in the world. Cheng Qianli would never be able to forget that unstoppable and invincible aura for the rest of his life. "Leave that Arab to me." The demonic Emperor Old Man's voice came from the side. "If my guess is correct, this person has already surpassed the peak of the Saint Martial realm and reached the subtle realm. With your current strength, you won't be able to deal with him." Subtle realm? Everyone turned to look, even Wang Chong turning to his master. In his last life, Wang Chong had reached a very high level, not one bit inferior to Abu Muslim, but not even Wang Chong had ever heard of the subtle realm. He only knew that the realm above the peak of the Saint Martial realm was the divine martial realm. But Wang Chong had no doubts about his master's words. Even in the apocalyptic era, the evil emperor was a legendary existence. His cultivation level had already surpassed the imagination of many martial artists. Master, do you mean that this Qutaybah's cultivation has already reached the point where he can delve into the essence of stellar energy and observe many things that were previously impossible? Wang Chong suddenly said. The evil emperor glanced in surprise at Wang Chong, and then he nodded. Chapter 1077. Everyone in the hall was stupefied, and even Gao Xinji was stunned by the evil emperor's theory. The system of energy in the Central Plains had been passed down for thousands of years and had long ago become a set of conventions. Thus, even Gao Xinji believed that he had reached the peak of the martial path. Even Gao Xinji didn't know how to cultivate beyond the pinnacle of the Saint Martial realm and above. In Gao Xinji's view, this invisible and powerful bottleneck was as unbreakable as the heavens themselves. But the demonic Emperor Old Man's words had suddenly opened a door before his eyes. An even higher realm above the peak of the Saint Martial realm had appeared before him. So that Qutaybah has already reached this level? Doesn't that make it impossible for us to defeat him? Chen Qinli couldn't help but ask. That's not the case. Based on my observations, that Qutaybah probably just stumbled into the subtle realm. If he had truly grasped the ability of the minute subtlety realm, then his sword would probably be completely different. It wouldn't be so majestic and mighty, but its power would probably be even more terrifying than it is now. The Wushang village chief, leaning on his cane, spoke from the side. I and Brother Wenfu discussed this for a very long time in the valley. The subtle realm is extremely powerful, and it also contains the mysteries of space. It's not something that can be easily grasped. Although that Qutaybah is powerful, he is still within the realm of martial artists. After the Battle of the Triangular Gap concluded on the Uzun Plateau, the chief of Wushang and the evil emperor had returned to Wushang village. One reason was to search for that mysterious object that had shaken the Central Plains for almost 1,000 years. The other reason was to verify what they had learned, to explore the principles of the world and search for a higher realm of martial arts. The subtle realm was a realm above the peak of the Saint Martial realm that the two of them had comprehended through their mutual verification of martial arts. Master and Senior have both touched upon that realm? Wang Chong suddenly asked the question that everyone wanted to know the most. Before the battle, the Arabs still had 4 great generals who had not yet entered the fray. At this decisive moment, if they had 2 subtle-level existences, the outcome would be completely different. The Tang dynasty would have a much higher chance of winning. But for Wang Chong, everything was different. His master cultivated the myriad spirit sea art. When his master had gathered the origin energy of the world into a storm to stop Qutaybah, Wang Chong had already sensed that his master had taken a different path through the supreme art and reached a new peak, perhaps even an even higher level than before. Unexpectedly, Wang Chong's words caused the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang's eyes to turn gloomy. The atmosphere suddenly became much heavier. No! The evil emperor let out a deep sigh and said, This old man has never seen Brother Wenfu's talent and attainments on the martial path in his life. If not for the fact that his Dantian was destroyed, he would have already reached that profound and meticulous realm. The chief of Wushang said. Wang Chong's heart sank as he listened, and he subconsciously turned to his master. The demonic emperor old man faintly smiled and gave a comforting smile, but Wang Chong's heart was still heavy. He knew that his master's cultivation was limited by his Dantian, but Wang Chong had never imagined that this problem would have such a large effect. From what the chief of Wushang had said, the destruction of his Dantian would probably prevent his master from reaching the subtle realm for the rest of his life. Master, is not even the myriad spirit sea art able to resolve this problem? Wang Chong somewhat reluctantly asked. A teacher for a day was a father for a lifetime. No matter what, Wang Chong did not wish for his master's Dantian to become his master's greatest regret. Chong, your master understands your intentions. However, To your master, I have already experienced everything that can be experienced in this life. The happiest moment of your master's life was taking you and little Yao as my disciples. As for the rest, your master no longer cares. The demonic emperor old man faintly smiled. In this aspect, he was abnormally open-minded. He had been arrogant and proud in his life, looked up to by millions, pursued by countless. But no matter how many times he had been disappointed or proud, at the end of his life, he had climbed back up and taken in 2 disciples that he was proud of. He had experienced a warmth that was hard to come by in his life. He no longer had any regrets in his life. A powerful martial path was something that countless people yearned for, but to the evil emperor, it was no longer his only pursuit. The sea can accommodate all rivers, and this one admires Brother Wenfu's temperament. We discussed the problem of Brother Wenfu's dantian back in the valley, but we didn't come up with a good solution. The myriad spirit sea art is so profound that if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have found it very difficult to imagine that it could allow someone with a shattered dantian to reach an even higher level. The chief of Wushang said, "There are 50 great Tao arts, and the heavens use 49 of them. Nothing can be perfect, and this is a flaw that cannot be remedied. Thanks to Brother Wenfu, although this old man has touched upon the threshold of that level, I am already old, and I fear that it will be impossible for me to reach that level in this lifetime." The chief of Wushang had a kind and amiable smile on his face. Even though he could touch it, he could not enter it. This was truly a huge regret, but the chief of Wushang was rather open-minded about it. Everyone in the hall had a desolate look on their faces. When they heard the words subtle realm, they had all believed that the evil emperor and the chief of Wushang had reached that level, but they hadn't imagined that they would still be a little lacking. No matter what, the Tang dynasty is greatly fortunate to have 2 seniors join us. At the very least, we will have a fighting chance with Kataba. Gao Xianji suddenly spoke, bringing everyone back to the battlefield. The more than 400,000 Arab soldiers were still eyeing the city like a tiger stalking its prey, an enormous threat to them. I only want to say one thing. Daluan Ruozan and Dewisili have led their army to the northwest of Uzan, passing through Greater and Lesser Balar. If all goes as expected, they should reach the battlefield soon. When the 2 armies meet up, it will be even more disadvantageous to us. Suddenly, a young and aloof voice came from the side, its tone devoid of politeness. Hearing this, everyone in the hall froze and looked in the direction of the voice. They saw a young general standing next to Wang Chong, his lips tightly pursed, his expression cold and aloof as he fearlessly stared at the crowd. No one else in the hall had said anything, but the generals of the Anshi Protectorate army couldn't help but frown. From the armor he was wearing, it didn't seem like it was of a very high level. All the generals in the hall, including the vice protector generals, had been polite, but none of them had dared to spout nonsense like this person. Wang Chong, who is this little brother? Gao Xianji faintly smiled. He didn't care much about this young general's rashness. Although he had never seen him before, anyone who had followed the reinforcements to this place was basically Wang Chong's people. Su Hanshan. Su Hanshan fearlessly stared straight at Gao Xianji. Even in front of this renowned protector general of the western regions, Su Hanshan showed no signs of backing down. He's still the same nasty temper. As he stood by the table, Wang Chong inwardly gave a bitter smile. This was not his first time interacting with Su Hanshan, and Su Hanshan had a nasty and stubborn temper. He had been like this the first time they had met, and he was still like this now. Protector General Gao, don't mind him. That's just how his personality is. He played a major role in the army's timely arrival. Wang Chong explained. Wang Chong had long ago learned that Su Hanshan had defeated Daluan Ruozan and Dewisili in the western regions. Su Hanshan was innately unskilled in the ways of the world, and this had been his greatest flaw in his last life. Only Wang Chong could help him from the side. There's no need for Protector General Wang to explain. Those with ability all have a temper, and he's right. Daluan Ruozan and Dewisili have yet to appear after their disappearance. Both of them are as cunning as foxes, and besides the Arabs, we also need to be wary of the Uzan and Western Turks. For a moment, everyone in the hall fell silent. One Kataba was vexing enough, and with the addition of Daluan Ruozan and Dewusili's armies, the situation was far from optimistic. No matter how many soldiers the Arabs and Uzan have, this battle is no longer that important. At this moment, Wang Chong suddenly spoke, immediately attracting the attention of everyone in the hall. Soldiers are valued for quality, not quantity. Although the Arabs and Uzan have more than 400,000 elite soldiers, we also have 110,000, and these are the strongest of the best. The Divine Prison Army, Xuanwu Army, Dragon Stallion Army, Roaring Tiger Army, these are the strongest soldiers of the Tang Dynasty, and not all of them have entered the battlefield yet. Besides that, Su Hanshan has also brought 5,000 Tang Dynasty ballistae. In total, we have more than 6,000 Tang Dynasty ballistae at Talas. There is no other army like this in the entire Tang Dynasty. Wang Chang's eyes slowly swept over the crowd, his gaze resolute and his expression confident. The Divine Prison Army, Xuanwu Army, Dragon Stallion Army, Roaring Tiger Army, Divine Martial Army, this was an army formed from the finest elites of the Tang Dynasty. Any imperial marshal could only dream of such an extravagant outfit, something that was difficult to achieve. These soldiers had all been trained for 10-some years and had been carefully selected, all equipped with immense combat experience and fighting power. In addition, these 6,000 unstoppable Tang Dynasty ballistae were truly a force that could kill gods and Buddhas. The edge of this army was not one bit inferior to the Arabs, and in some aspects, it even surpassed them. The Arabs might be strong, but the Tang Dynasty is not weak either. In this battle, we will show the Arabs what a true soul of the dragon is. A true man of the dragon. Chapter 1078. The hall was quiet. Each of Wang Chang's words was powerful and resonated in the minds of the people present. The somewhat oppressive and heavy atmosphere was infected by Wang Chang's enthusiasm, and the atmosphere immediately became spirited. The Divine Prison Army, the Xuanwu Army, the Dragon Stallion Army, the Roaring Tiger Army, and the second wave of reinforcements from Qixi. Other than Wang Chong, no one knew the exact composition and numbers of these reinforcements. Not even Gao Xinji knew anything about the many soldiers Wang Chong had mobilized from the interior of the Tang Dynasty. At the very least, Gao Xinji had never heard of the Xuanwu Army and the Divine Prison Army of the Imperial Army, nor did he know how formidable they were. But Wang Chong, as the commander of this entire plan, understood this better than he did. Quality of soldiers, not quantity, was not just a saying, but a principle that Wang Chong had believed in his entire life. Having lived 2 lives and experienced many things, he had become accustomed to fighting with fewer to defeat the many. The number of soldiers was very important, but the overall quality of the soldiers was the most important. The reason that the Tang Dynasty had been able to use its 600,000 soldiers to conquer so many empires and forge a legend of unprecedented prosperity was precisely because of the powerful fighting power of its soldiers. Wang Chong, what do you think? Gao Xinji suddenly asked. To Gao Xinji, the progress of this war had already surpassed his expectations. There were many things that he had never imagined would happen when he had attacked the Shi Kingdom. But Wang Chong was different. He was very young, but he had a deep understanding of war and its arrangements, including the plan for the reinforcements, like the back of his hand. There was no question that the reinforcements this time had reached 60,000, and all of them were elites. This had all been specially prepared by Wang Chong before the start of the war. Heh! Wang Chong chuckled, but he did not deny it. The Arabs are not as strong as we imagine. Although I can't be sure of the final result of this battle, there is one thing that I can be sure of. No matter what the Arabs want to do, they will suffer an unprecedented wound at Talas. With these words, Wang Chang's eyes hardened. Talas quickly entered a tense period of preparation, with all the soldiers entering the city for intensive training. The Divine Prison Army, Xuanwu Army, Dragon Stallion Army, and Roaring Tiger Army were all existences on par with the Iron Wall Army, but on the battlefield, what armies needed the most was cooperation. While the reinforcements had arrived and the Arabs did not dare to attack, Wang Chong had the Divine Army, divine, and other elite armies of soldiers, and began the most intense training. Wang Chong had personally taken over the training of the army. As the strongest war saint of the Central Plains, it had been a very long time since Wang Chong had gone all out to train an army. Wang Chong placed great importance on this battle. Meanwhile, while Wang Chong was training his soldiers at Talas, in the distant Arab camp, Abu Muslim, Ibak, Osman, and all the other Arab commanders besides Qutayba had gathered. What do all of you think of this war? Abu Muslim stood up around a long Arabic-styled table and looked at his comrades. The tent was quiet, all of them silently gazing at the map of Talas on the table. Osman and Ibak had the most complicated expressions on their faces. In the past, they would have definitely scoffed at Abu Muslim's proposal. Ibak and Osman rarely used any special tactics to deal with infidel empires, and the Arabian Empire rarely used any sort of strategy, formation, or tactics in its wars with foreign enemies. When one side's power reached a level where it could crush the other side, wisdom and strategy no longer mattered. Strength was the greatest wisdom and the greatest strategy. This empire is very difficult to deal with. It's probably much stronger than the Sassanid dynasty that we destroyed. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I would have found it very difficult to believe that they had someone who could compare to Qutayba, and an old man at that. Osman sternly said, a pensive look on his face. Not only that, the reinforcements they've brought seem to be extremely powerful, probably no weaker than the Anshi Protectorate Army's Iron Wall Army. If all of them are this powerful, even if they only have around 100,000 soldiers, we will find it very difficult to destroy them as easily as we imagined, Ibak sternly said. Ibak sternly said, as the commander of the Mamluk army and the most unique commander of the empire, Ibak rarely paid attention to the details of a battle, nor would he involve himself in a battle of this level. But the soldiers behind the steel defense line were so powerful that not even Ibak, the commander of the Mamluk army, could ignore them. Overall, our greatest advantage is that we have the absolute advantage in cavalry. The Tang people's steel defense line makes it very difficult for our soldiers to display their true power, but it also restrains them. Without the steel defense line, their defensive capabilities will be greatly weakened. Thus, in the short term, as long as we still have the initiative on the battlefield, they won't dare to leave the defense line and attack. Thus, the initiative is still in our hands. Ziyad sternly said. As the deputy governor of the East, Ziyad was glad that he had been born into an empire built on horseback. Otherwise, he found it very difficult to imagine any other faction besides Arabia that could contend against this empire. Not only that, Ziyad had an intense feeling that the opponent they were facing at Talas was a powerful existence second only to Arabia, a true second empire. It's already very difficult to judge the outcome of this battle. At the very least, until we understand the true strength of the Tang people's army, we can't launch an all-out attack. Right now, we have to wait for the Uzun and the Western Turks to arrive. Although these two empires of the East aren't as powerful as our Arabia, their understanding of the Tang dynasty might be able to provide us with some unexpected guidance and assistance. Abu Muslim said. He had already thought through the entire course of this battle. The Tang people were not as weak as imagined. Arabia needed to gather all its strength to utterly destroy them. Otherwise, it would be Arabia that faced the same predicament as the Tang people in the future. Although I've never met the Uzun and the Western Turks, if you insist on waiting for them to arrive before starting the decisive battle, have you thought about how to explain things to Qutayba? Osman's voice was loud and clear as he slowly turned his gaze away from the map of Talas and toward Abu Muslim. Although Abu Muslim, Osman, and other top-class Arab governors had gathered for this night's meeting, Qutayba had been left out. The dispute from the day was still fresh in their minds, so no one dared to offend Qutayba. Qutayba was a true battle maniac, and his retreat during the day had already left him extremely dissatisfied. If he had to stand here and wait for the arrival of the Uzun and the Western Turks, no one would be able to imagine what he would do. If Qutayba were enraged, no one here would be a match for him. Osman's words plunged the tent into silence. Qutayba's existence was like the sun and moon in the sky. One could not raise their head, but they could not ignore his existence. If Qutayba insisted on attacking, not even Abu Muslim would be able to stop him. This was precisely the predicament everyone in the tent was facing. Boom! As everyone fell silent, the earth suddenly began to shake as the stomping of hooves came from the rear of the Arab army. All the great generals in the tent were stunned by this sound. They truly couldn't think of any other force that could appear in the rear of the Arab army. Could it be? Suddenly, a blurry thought flitted through Abu Muslim's mind. Reporting! At almost the same time, an Arab messenger rushed into the tent. Before he could clearly see who was inside, he immediately got down on one knee and bowed. Reporting to Lord Governor, a large army has been discovered outside. The other side says that they are our allies, soldiers belonging to the Uzun and the Western Turks. Their commander is called Daluan Ruozan. What? Abu Muslim's face lit up with joy. Wonderful. With no time to explain, Abu Muslim strode out of the tent. Ibak and Osman exchanged glances with each other before quickly following him. At the same time, in the rear of the Arab army, a group of soldiers was galloping across a narrow stone bridge and galloping toward the Arabs. Gallop! A figure wearing an azure Confucian robe rode a tall highland steed across the bridge and toward the Arab camp. Ha Huashu, it seems like we're not too late. The Arabs and the Tang people have yet to engage in a decisive battle. Daluan Ruozan lightly waved his sleeve as he gazed at the distant torches illuminating the Arab camp like stars in the night sky, as well as the towering city of Talas. Just as Milord predicted, it seems like the trenches and pits we ordered to dig were effective. The reinforcements of the Tang dynasty arrived around 2 days later than expected. A voice came from the rear as Huashu Wuzong rode up on Uzun's divine steed. Although he had lost to the Tang people and that boy called Su Hanshan in a direct battle, Daluan Ruozan had still succeeded in using the trenches and pits he had dug to stop the reinforcements of the Tang dynasty, delaying their arrival and buying him enough time to circle around the rear. Although he had taken a large detour, Uzun had not been late to this battle. Milord, look, the Arabs are moving. A slightly plump deputy next to Daluan Ruozan suddenly called out. These words immediately attracted everyone's attention, and countless eyes turned to the north. There, the Arab army that had been so rigidly organized was suddenly beginning to stir. As everyone watched, the Arab army parted like a wave, allowing a stalwart figure to lead many Arab generals toward them. An old friend has come. Come, let's go and meet Abu Muslim. With these words, Daluan Ruozan urged his horse forward, leading the way in the direction of the Arabs. On the other side, Abu Muslim looked on with a smile in his eyes. Chapter 1079. Bang. When the Arab and Uzun soldiers met, both sides exploded with heaven-shaking cheers. These thunderous cheers echoed through the night sky, alarming the defenders on the walls of Talas. Daluan Ruozan and Duwisili have arrived early. On the high walls of Talas, Cheng Qianli and Wang Chong stood side by side, the former's hair and clothes blowing in the wind as he stared at the dazzling lights in the distance, his mind in agitation. When soldiers come, we'll have to deal with them. In the end, this battle is unavoidable. Wang Chong stood on the side with his hands held behind his back, also looking into the distance. Unlike Cheng Qianli, Daluan Ruozan and Duwisili's arrival made his heart sink, but Wang Chong's eyes remained calm. What would come would come. At this point in the battle, there was very little that could shake his heart. Pass on my order. Stop training and rest for tomorrow's decisive battle. Wang Chong sternly ordered without turning his head. Yes. A voice came from behind him and then quickly faded away. A storm was brewing, and all the opponents in this battle had entered the field. Although the night was still quiet, Wang Chong was well aware that this battle would be the cruelest trial for all sides. The night quickly passed as the sky brightened. Ever since the black eclipse of the sun, all of Talas had been getting colder and colder. At this moment, on the western side of Talas, separated by a distance of tens of thousands of zhang, the two most powerful armies in the history of the continent were facing off against each other. The confrontation between the two armies had lasted from last night until now. Boom. After some time, everyone suddenly heard the loud blare of a horn. Rumble. The silence was shattered by the galloping of hoofs. 4 large black banners emerged from the Arab camp and began to move forward. Majestic figures stood beneath the black banners, exuding an aura as vast as the sea. As these figures moved, the motionless Arab army seemed to come to life, surging in the direction of Talas with the blaring of horns. Boom! At almost the same time, sensing the somber aura in the distance, the massive gates of Talas opened. Immediately after, waves of soldiers in shiny armor surged out of the city like a torrent of steel, surging toward the steel defense line in front of them. It's begun! At the very front of the army were Wang Chong, Gao Xinji, Cheng Qianli, the evil emperor, and Chief Wushang. One mountain could not hold 2 tigers, and after more than a month of delay, the inevitable decisive battle between the Arabs and the Tang dynasty had finally arrived. The air was even colder and gloomier than it had been in the last 2 days. Wang Chong rode his horse through the frigid winds and quickly arrived at the front. Behind the long steel line of defense, rows of soldiers stood upright, looking forward. Although the battle had yet to begin, everyone could feel the tension in the air. Warning! The second phase of the Battle of Talas is about to begin. This will be the final battle between the Great Tang and Arabia. The 2 empires must decide the final victor. Wang Chong said, "Starting now, for every 50,000 Arab soldiers killed, user will be rewarded with 10,000 points of destiny energy. If the Tang dynasty has less than 20,000 soldiers left, user will be deducted 100,000 points of destiny energy. If the war is lost, user will be completely obliterated." At almost the same time, a string of messages rang out in Wang Chong's mind. This was the highest reward the Stone of Destiny had ever issued. As he listened to the high rewards the Stone of Destiny had announced, Wang Chong's expression slowly turned grave. With such a high reward, does it mean that this war will be more dangerous and severe than any other war? Wang Chong indifferently said to himself, but his eyes were unwavering. Since this war was unavoidable, he would personally deliver it to the very end. "Milord, look over there." A figure galloped forward, gazing at the distant young figure that had suddenly appeared behind the city of steel. At almost the same time, Daluan Ruozhen, Huashu Wizong, Dusong Mangpoj, and Duisili all turned to Wang Chong. As a crucial figure in this war, Wang Chong's appearance on the battlefield had undoubtedly attracted everyone's attention. Even Abu Muslim and Ziyad had turned to look at him. If there was one Tang people that everyone wanted to kill in this war, it had to be Wang Chong. If not for him, the Arabs and Uzun would have already won this war and occupied the western regions. At this stage of the battle, the Tang dynasty no longer has any path of retreat. Let's see how he responds. Daluan Ruozhen faintly smiled as he looked into the distance. Although they had spent a great deal of time and encountered a few twists and turns along the way, the army of 100,000 Tibetans and Western Turks had finally achieved their initial goal, successfully bypassing the steel defense line and joining forces with the Arabs. "Wang Chong, we've returned to square one, 400,000 soldiers against 100,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty. Last time, it was us and Meng Shizhao, but this time, it's a 3-way alliance. In this battle, will you be able to overcome the many and reverse the tide like last time?" As these thoughts flitted through his mind, Daluan Ruozhen faintly smiled and returned to normal. "Order the army to get ready." "Yes, Prime Minister." A messenger quickly responded and left. War banners fluttered in the wind. At this moment, not far from Daluan Ruozhen, Abu Muslim, Osman, Ibak, and Ziyad, 4 top-class Arab commanders, had gathered. The 4 of them were all looking in the same direction. The area beneath the black Hellflame war banner was completely empty, with no sign of that person. "What do we do?" Governor Osman turned his head to Abu Muslim. "Qutayba still hasn't appeared. Let's wait a little longer. Without his soldiers, we won't be able to win this battle." Abu Muslim sternly said. Even though he and Qutayba were both governors of Arabia, in reality, Qutayba's status was far above theirs. Even though the army was ready to go and the bugle had been blown, none of the 4 dared to move without Qutayba's appearance. Truly a thorny problem. Ibak said with a frown. As the highest commander of the Mamluks, no one had ever dared to make him wait for so long, but Ibak did not dare to complain. Even more awkward was that he could not explain these matters to Daluin Ruozan. "How about it, Lord Governor? Shall we begin?" The sound of hooves could be heard as Daluin Ruozan rode over on his highland steed, speaking in pure Arabic. The four of them felt a little awkward at Daluin Ruozan's words. "Milord, Lord Qutayba has come." Just when the mood was at its most awkward, an Arab horseman rode up from the rear of the army. The four of them trembled at these words and turned their heads. Even Daluin Ruozan seemed to sense something. Following their gazes, they saw that the army in the distance had suddenly parted as a golden armored figure descended like a sun to the mortal world slowly made his way toward them. His speed was not very fast, but each step seemed to carry enormous weight. The moment this person appeared, Abu Muslim, Osman, and the other Arab governors instantly became like fireflies before the bright moon, dimming and dimming. When that godlike figure appeared on the battlefield, it immediately became the well-deserved focus and center of the entire battlefield. "This is the Viceroy of War?" Daluin Ruozan narrowed his eyes as this thought flitted through his mind. He had not been present at yesterday's battle, so he didn't know the details, but Daluin Ruozan's proficiency in Arabic had allowed him to gather enough information. "So, this is the person that both Abu Muslim and Osman are extremely wary of?" Daluin Ruozan had never seen Qutayba, but this first glance was enough to leave an indelible impression on Daluin Ruozan. Uzan had no lack of experts, and the Great Snow Mountain Temple had many hermit experts, but other than the holy monk, no one else could give him such an intense shock. At this moment, he suddenly began to understand why people of Abu Muslim and Osman's status would be so apprehensive about this Qutayba. "This fellow is so frightening." At this moment, Dewussili narrowed his eyes, his eyelids twitching. Ever since he had started cultivating formation phenomena, Dewussili had gotten much stronger. Other than the battle with the Tang dynasty reinforcements, where he had suffered a loss at the hands of those two old fogies, he truly hadn't paid much attention to anyone else. But this Qutayba, even Dewussili found it somewhat difficult to endure the sharp aura exuding from him. Too frightening. How could the Arabs have such a terrifying expert? On the side, Huoshu Wuzong and Dusong Mengpoj were also tense, their eyes brimming with apprehension as they stared at that distant golden figure. But Qutayba seemed to not see them. His entire body was shrouded in golden light, and his expression was cold as he slowly rode forward. "Are you ready?" Qutayba stopped next to Abu Muslim's group and asked. Although he was speaking to Abu Muslim's group, Qutayba's eyes were focused forward, not even glancing at them. His voice was cold and aloof, and his eyes were emotionless. "Yes." In the end, it was Ziyad who stepped forward and broke the silence. "Milord, when will we begin the attack?" Abu Muslim, Osman, Ibak, Daluin Ruozan, and Dewussili all turned to Qutayba. Chapter 1080. Clang. As everyone was waiting for Qutayba's reply, they suddenly heard the clear cry of a sword. Before they could react, a golden beam of sword chi soared into the sky. Rumble! There was an earth-shattering boom, and in the next moment, the shocking golden sword chi immediately fell from the sky. It landed heavily on the ground as if a mountain of gold and jade had been toppled over. Crack! The earth split open as a long fissure appeared in front of Qutayba, extending across the battlefield all the way to the steel walls of the Tang dynasty. The earth swayed and dust churned as the entire world seemed to tremble beneath Qutayba's feet. "Qutayba! Qutayba! Qutayba!" In a flash, the entire battlefield was filled with cheers for Qutayba. At this moment, Qutayba had become the strongest existence in everyone's minds. After witnessing Qutayba's terrifying strength that could make gods and ghosts weep, his reputation in the army had reached its peak. A horn blared, and with Qutayba's blow, the sea of Arab cavalry formed into orderly ranks and began to rumble toward the Tang ranks. Translated by Hypersheep 325, the Arabs have begun to attack. Xue Qianjun suddenly said, his expression grave as he stared at the black flood of Arab cavalry. Clang, clang, clang. The clattering of metal resounded through the air as countless war halos erupted from beneath the feet of the Arabs, quickly forming a dense forest of halos. When hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers charged together, their momentum could topple mountains and overturn seas. Su Hanshan, are you ready? Wang Chong only glanced at Su Hanshan for a moment before retracting his gaze. Su Hanshan waved his hand and gestured behind him. Suddenly, there was a creaking sound as the 5,000 ballistae lined up, bolts quickly loaded and aimed at the enemy. The sharp tips of the bolts gleamed with a cold light under the gloomy sky. Wang Chong glanced at the 20,000-some ballista soldiers and gave a satisfied nod. Although these 20,000-some ballista soldiers had originally been formed from bandits and brigands of the Silk Road, Su Hanshan's training had given them a tenacious and iron-blooded aura. Su Hanshan had used his unique charm to wash away the mark of bandits and brigands on their bodies. Even Wang Chong couldn't help but admire him for this. In the future, he will definitely achieve the goal he couldn't in his last life and become a true imperial great general of the Tang dynasty. Wang Chong glanced at Su Hanshan and said to himself, Su Hanshan's fighting style was extremely sharp and incisive, and he possessed a formidable ability to pierce through defenses. Few imperial great generals of the Tang dynasty could compare to him in this aspect. Only Su Hanshan could train unorthodox characters like bandits and brigands into first-class soldiers. General Zhao. General Wang. General Long. Without turning his head, Wang Chong called out the names of several more people. "Milord, the Xuanwu army is on standby." Behind him, the quasi-grand marshal of the great Tang capital, Zhao Fengchen, reached behind his back and drew the 7 qi long Earth's scar. Under the dim light, a faint trace of blood could be seen on the blade of the Earth's scar, a ghastly sight to behold. Behind him, the 8,000 heavily armored Xuanwu army soldiers began to grow restless. Not only was there no fear in their eyes as they stared at the vast and imposing Arab army, their fighting spirit soaring to the heavens. Soldiers are nurtured for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. Zhao Fengchen had used a special method to train them, and the Xuanwu army was gradually beginning to sense the formidable strength in their bodies. The imperial army of the capital could no longer compare to them. The Xuanwu army was now confident that it could defeat any foe. "Milord, Wang Sili is on standby." Not long after Zhao Fengchen spoke, a group of soldiers and the 8,000 soldiers of the Xuanwu army were clearly separated. At the very front of this group was a middle-aged quasi-commander-in-chief with deep and wise eyes. 7 stars were shining brightly on the left side of his chest plate. Starving Wolf War General Wang Sili. This fierce general under Big Dipper Great General Geshu Han's command was standing straight, his eyes brimming with fighting spirit as he stared at the Arabs. No matter what sort of grudges Wang Chong had with Geshu Han in the past, at this moment, in this distant Talas, none of that mattered. All of them had only one identity, the Tang people. All of them had only one goal that they needed to defend, the Tang dynasty. There was only one goal that they needed to defeat, Arabia. Dragon Stallion Army's Long Jian is on standby. Roaring Tiger Army's Du Wei is on standby. Following one voice after another, behind the first line of defense, armors rumbled. Troops after troops looked at the other side of the battlefield, their spirits trembling, their eyes bursting with a strong will to fight. The Divine Prison Army, the Ultimate Martial Army, the Dragon Stallion Army, these were the top-class fighting forces of the Tang dynasty, their bodies exploding with astonishing energy. And behind them was the muscular figure of Cui Piaoqi, his head held high. Behind him were more than 10,000 Wushang cavalry, each emanating a formidable aura. And behind them were the several thousand soldiers of the Anxi Protectorate Army's Iron Wall Army. And behind the Iron Wall Army were the nearly 10,000 soldiers of the Mo Saber Unit, their sabers raised high as they formed a human wall at the very back of the defense line. The battle had not yet begun, but the Tang dynasty was already exuding a somber aura that was not one bit inferior to that of the Arabs. Whoosh! The gales howled, the warhorses neighed, and the heavens shook as hundreds of thousands of Arab cavalry charged toward the battlefield like an avalanche. Translated by Hypersheep 325 Wang Chong, Gao Xianji, Wang Yan, Cheng Qianli, the evil emperor, the chief of Wushang, all the top-class generals of the Tang dynasty had gathered behind the first defense line, solemnly gazing at the enemy. Clothes flapping in the wind and the atmosphere tense, the 110,000 soldiers of the Tang dynasty were silent, a stark contrast to the Arab cavalry. 80,000 zhang. 50,000 zhang. 30,000 zhang. Rumble. The earth trembled as the vast sea of Arab cavalry once more displayed their astonishing fighting power, crossing tens of thousands of zhang in the blink of an eye. In the blink of an eye, the Arabs were less than 100 zhang from the Tang dynasty's defense line. Kaio! Kaio! A few moments later, the tens of thousands of Arab cavalry crashed into the first defense line of the Tang dynasty. Boom! There was a massive explosion like that of a comet crashing into the earth, so loud that it almost tore apart one's eardrums. Nay! War horses neighed and people stood on their hind legs. Countless soldiers were instantly thrown high into the air by the strong impact and were thrown more than 100 feet high. Release! At almost the same time, Su Hanshan waved his hand, and the 5,000 ballistae fired at the same time. Bang bang bang! Tens of thousands of Arab cavalry were felled by the fall of wooden stakes. In a single volley and screams, Su Hanshan's 5,000 ballistae had taken away more than 20,000 Arab cavalry. Warhorse collided with warhorse and corpse piled up in front of the first defense line. In the blink of an eye, the ground was littered with Arab corpses. A large clearing immediately appeared around these corpses. Even the valiant Arabs couldn't help but shudder at this sight. Beneath the black war banners, Daluan Ruozan, Duwisili, and the others couldn't help but widen their eyes. Even now, the ballistae of the Tang dynasty were the most feared killing machines in the Central Plains. Even the Arabs, famed for their cavalry, were as fragile as paper in the face of the ballistae. Release! Su Hanshan's expression was cold and aloof, not even glancing at the corpses on the ground. His body was as straight as a spear, his eyes fixed on the vast sea of Arab soldiers. Su Hanshan had not fired this volley ahead of time. Instead, he had chosen the moment when the Arabs were charging over, when their formation was the most concentrated and when the ballistae could fire their first volley with the greatest power. Boom boom boom. The air whistled as 5,000 ballista bolts shot through the air like dragons emerging from the sea, leaving long trails in their wake as they struck the Arab cavalry. Bang bang bang. The dense ranks of the ballista bolts once more fell to the ground. Although this volley hadn't killed as many people as the last, it had still claimed more than 15,000 Arab cavalry. 2 volleys had already claimed more than 35,000 Arab cavalry. If not for the fact that the soldiers Qutayba and Osman had brought with them were of the finest quality, wearing thick and sturdy armor, the Arabs would have suffered even more casualties. Release! At the same time, Chen Bin ordered the 1,000 Tang dynasty ballistae to fire, unleashing countless bolts. Bang bang bang. More and more Arabs fell to the first defense line. In the distance, Aibak, Osman, and the other Arab commanders widened their eyes, but none of them said a word, showing any intention of retreating. Kill! In a few short moments, more than 10,000 soldiers had fallen to the Tang dynasty defense line, but these losses had no effect on the Arabs. Send out our soldiers as well. Standing next to Aibak and Osman, Daluan Ruozan's eyes flashed as he gave the order to charge. Where there was war, there would be casualties. The Great Tang was not an easy foe to deal with, and casualties were normal in this war. At this point of the battle, it would not end until one side completely fell. Kill! Chapter 1082. Boom boom boom. The ballistae were still firing, and the vast sea of Arabs showed no signs of stopping. Amidst the roars of the army, there was a particularly eye-catching rumble. Look over there! A voice came from the middle of the army. Zhang Ke was standing on a transport vehicle, pointing at a certain place, his eyelids twitching in shock. It's those silver war chariots. Following Zhang Ke's gaze, he saw silver flashes of light in the Arab army. In the distance, massive silver weapons were lined up at the very front, slowly making their way from the Arab side to the Great Tang. All of them were very familiar with these powerful siege weapons of the Arabs. Qutayba had brought them from the northern war zone specifically to deal with the Tang dynasty's steel defense lines. Their formidable defense and inconceivable offensive power were enough to move anyone. They've changed tactics. In the crowd, Huang Badian looked off into the distance, his expression incomparably solemn. On the first day, Qutayba had only sent several hundred silver behemoths, and the Arabs had pushed these silver behemoths as quickly as possible to reach the Tang dynasty's defense lines. They had adopted a strategy that could end the battle as quickly as possible. But this time was completely different. The Arabs had reduced the speed of these silver behemoths to the minimum, and the several thousand silver behemoths lined up in a row to form another kind of steel wall. Behind the walls, tens of thousands of Arab soldiers surged forward like a tide. They're using these silver war chariots to cover their charge. Our ballistae will find it very difficult to break through their defense, making it impossible for us to deal any damage to them. A voice rang out in everyone's ears. Sun Jiming was riding his warhorse, standing in the third row behind Wang Chong, a look of deep concern on his face. Bang! A long crossbow bolt shot out and instantly hit a silver beast. A deafening roar resounded throughout the battlefield, but the crossbow bolt broke. It didn't penetrate the silver beast's defense. Su Hanshan's eyes twitched at this sight, and with a gesture, he quickly ended the probing. Their defenses are extremely formidable. There's no need to worry about them. Change targets and attack the other Arab cavalry. Su Hanshan's expression was grave and stern, and there was not the slightest ripple in his eyes. He gestured to the ballista unit to his right. The 3,000 ballistae quickly changed positions and headed to the other side. Although the Arabs had more than 1,000 silver behemoths and could cover a vast area of the battlefield, they could not cover the entire army. Release! As the ballista army moved, Su Hanshan's ballista army began firing once more. Squelch, squelch, squelch. One Arab horseman after another were shot through, their corpses flying across the ground in a cloud of dust. The Earth Shield army hasn't arrived yet. Beneath the black banner of hell, Qutayba's expression was calm and composed, his voice devoid of emotion. Sir, the Earth Shield army has already set off. Judging from the time, they should have already arrived at the battlefield. A voice came from behind Qutayba, coming from a valiant general covered in armor with only his eyes exposed. The Earth Shield army was the only defensive army under Qutayba's command. Qutayba had always been famed for his endless battles, and he rarely defended. But nothing was absolute. The Earth Shield army was a heavy shield army that Qutayba had specially conscripted to defend against the attacks of his foes. This army did not have many soldiers, only a little more than 10,000, but all the Earth Shield soldiers had undergone extremely strict training, each of them enduring the harshest of trials and enduring more than 100 arduous battles. It was only through these trials that this steel army had been formed. In past battles, they had fought against countless foes, many of them terrifying existences on par with the Mamelukes. Qutayba's basic requirement for this army was that it could endure 100 of his attacks. Boom boom boom. Qutayba had barely spoken when the distant battlefield began to shift. As countless people watched, the Arab right flank began to stir. Countless soldiers began to push forward from the sides, a massive wave of energy surging forward. A moment later, there was a clattering of metal as one massive shield after another appeared in the gloomy sky, gleaming with a cold light. Each of these shields was 7 to 8 feet tall. At first glance, one could only see no shadows of the people on the shields, and the warriors behind them were completely covered. With a deafening roar, the 10,000-some Arab Earth Shield warriors formed a wall as they rapidly advanced toward the first defense line. These soldiers marched forward in an orderly fashion. When nearly 10,000 soldiers marched forward at the same pace at full speed, that kind of imposing manner was like a tidal wave, extremely shocking. Seeing this scene, even Su Hanshan, who was behind the first layer of defense, felt his eyelids twitching. However, it only lasted for an instant before returning to normal. Release! Without the slightest hesitation, Su Hanshan waved his arm, and 5,000 ballista bolts shot forward like lightning bolts, striking the Earth Shield soldiers. Boom, boom, boom. This clash had attracted the attention of countless people, and all the ballista soldiers, including the Arab Earth Shield soldiers, felt their hearts in their throats. Translated by Hypersheep 325 times seemed to have come to a standstill at this moment. The 7 to 8 feet tall and half a foot thick heavy shield suddenly trembled. Then, as if it had been struck by a terrifying gravitational force, a part of the shield suddenly caved in. At the same time, countless tiny cracks appeared on the surface of the shield. In an instant, the face of the Earth Shield warrior turned extremely pale. He had experienced countless bitter battles and had personally witnessed the power of the Tang Dynasty ballistae. There was no question that this was the strongest weapon he had ever seen. However, the terrifying force on the Earth Shield quickly disappeared. Even though the Earth Shield warrior's arm was numb from the impact of the terrifying force, he still relied on his great strength to firmly withstand the wave of force. The Earth Shield soldier in the rear breathed a sigh of relief. Similar scenes were taking place everywhere. In this fierce battle, not a single one of the 10,000 Earth Shield soldiers had been killed. They had completely blocked the attacks of the Tang Dynasty ballistae. Boom! The moment the Earth Shield soldiers succeeded in blocking the ballistae, the tens of thousands of Arab cavalry in the rear began to cheer in excitement. They were even more excited than the Earth Shield soldiers. The Arabs viewed war as their mission, and all their soldiers did not fear death, but this did not mean that they did not want to live. The thousands of Tang Dynasty ballistae were undoubtedly the worst nightmare of the Arab cavalry. Buzz! Not just Su Hanshan, but even Wang Chong slightly paled at this sight. Wang Chong had seen all kinds of heavy shield armies, but this was the first time Wang Chong had seen someone who could block the attacks of ballistae with just a shield and the strength of their bodies. The strength of these Arab shield soldiers was definitely something that Wang Chong had never seen before. Everyone hear my order. Without the slightest hesitation, Su Hanshan changed his strategy. Stop firing. Form groups of 5 ballistae and focus fire on the top of the shields. Crick. Su Hanshan's control over the 5,000 ballistae had reached a level where it was like a part of his own body. The 5,000 ballistae began to move according to Su Hanshan's order. With 5 ballistae in a group, the ballistae quickly changed directions, reducing their target from 5,000 to 1,000. Release! Su Hanshan's expression was cold as he swung down his right hand. Boom, boom, boom. A series of concentrated sounds rang out. Under everyone's gaze, 5 different crossbow bolts shot out from 5 different directions. In just an instant, they immediately traversed a distance of several thousand feet and hit a large shield in the distance. The Earth Shield soldiers behind the 7-foot-tall shield didn't even have time to breathe a sigh of relief before they were struck by the strongest attack in their history. The huge shield seemed to be on the verge of shattering as it let out a series of thunderous roars. The terrifying power even penetrated through the shield and through his arms and shoulders, blasting into his body. Pooh! The Earth Shield warriors spat out mouthfuls of bloody mist almost simultaneously. Aya! In just a few short moments, one of the Earth Shield soldiers was unable to endure this dreadful attack and was sent flying like a rag doll. As for the other warriors, even though they were able to withstand this wave of attacks with their physical strength, they were still pushed back by the 5 crossbow bolts and plowed deep grooves on the ground. Release! Su Hanshan's eyes were like torches as he stared at the Earth Shield soldiers. When he saw this, Su Hanshan didn't hesitate to unleash another wave of terrifying attacks on these Earth Shield warriors. No one could block the attacks of these great Tang ballistae with their bodies of flesh and blood. In Su Hanshan's view, no matter how powerful his foe was, as long as he used the right method, all the shield-wielding warriors would die before the ballistae. As the second volley of ballista bolts descended, the 10,000 Earth Shield soldiers finally began to suffer casualties. Boom! The shield of Earth that had been tempered thousands of times and had withstood countless attacks like a storm was instantly shattered into pieces. The pieces of the shield were wrapped in a huge force and flew more than 100 feet into the air. Meanwhile, the warrior behind the shield was also thrown high up into the air. With a poof sound, he was shot by the crossbow bolt that followed closely behind him. Under the huge inertia, his body flew more than 100 feet away. Release, release, release. Su Hanshan's eyes were sharp as he stared at the Arab cavalry. When the Earth Shield soldiers suffered casualties and a gap appeared, Su Hanshan immediately seized this opportunity to fire ballista bolts into the Arab cavalry in the rear. Translated by Hypersheep 325. In a flash, men and horses were thrown off their feet and blood sprayed through the air. Caught off guard, the soldiers were pierced through by the ballista bolts and dropped to the ground. Release again. Su Hanshan's eyes flashed with cold light as he once more ordered his soldiers to attack. In this clash with the Earth Shield soldiers, he had completely grasped the initiative. Chapter 1083. As expected, giving him the ballista army was the correct choice. Su Hanshan is famed for his fierce attacks, and when combined with the power of the Tang Dynasty ballistae, he's practically invincible. Not even Qin Bin would be able to use the ballista army to its fullest potential. Wang Chong quietly said to himself, there were some people who were born to be outstanding great generals. Even in the smallest details, they could still shine with dazzling light. Su Hanshan was clearly this sort of person. No matter how powerful his opponent was, he would always be able to find a chance, create a chance, and defeat his opponent in a single blow. The Arab Earth Shield army was the best example. But Wang Chong had no time to care about these things. In the distance, the steel wall formed by more than 1,000 silver behemoths was rapidly advancing toward the Tang dynasty. They were now less than 20 zhang away. Once these silver behemoths got close, all the steel defense lines would immediately crumble. Divine Martial Army, get ready. Wang Chong's eyes flashed with cold light as he suddenly ordered without turning his head. Boom! A heaven-shaking rumble came from behind him as the 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army to Wang Chong's right suddenly took a step forward. This single step caused an enormous energy to explode, distorting even space itself. The 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army had solemn expressions, their bodies exuding an aura as sharp as a sword. For the first time in the Longxi region, the elite Divine Martial Army under Geshu Han's command appeared on the battlefield of Talas, west of the Tsong Mountains. The 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army had bright expressions, their eyes determined, and their muscles taut to the extreme. Rumble! Along with the rumbling of the earth, more than 1,000 silver-white war machines rapidly advanced to a distance of less than 30 meters from the first line of defense. Go! With this order, Starving Wolf War General Wang Sili unsheathed his sword and rode out from behind the first defense line. Behind him, the 3,000 soldiers of the Shenwu army quickly followed with swords in hand. Kill! The sounds of fighting shook the heavens, and the sight of the 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army galloped out from behind the walls caused the surrounding Arab cavalry to surge forward like a tide. Sabers and swords constantly flashed under the cold and gloomy sky. These Arab cavalry were all elites, and not only were they all powerful, they also maintained a tacit understanding with each other as they charged, cooperating with each other. Boom, boom, boom. In the face of the dense sea of Arab cavalry, the 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army strode forward without the slightest fear. Clang! The moment the two armies clashed, the 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army unsheathed their swords, the sharp tips of their swords reflecting off the dazzling halos beneath their feet. With a single slash, the 3,000 Arab cavalry were cleaved in two along with their horses. Before these Arab corpses could even fall to the ground, the soldiers of the Divine Martial Army were already resolutely marching into the ranks of the Arab cavalry with an unstoppable momentum. Kill them! Their target is the silver behemoth. Don't let them get close. The sounds of fighting and shouts filled the air, and it was no longer possible to tell which were men and which were horses. It was even difficult to distinguish the weapons of one another. A bloody mist permeated the air, and the pungent smell of blood quickly intensified. But no matter how many Arab cavalry there were, they could not stop the advance of the Divine Martial Army. Clang! A sword flashed through the air, cleaving 2 Arab horsemen and their horses in two, the immense power of the blow even sending their corpses flying into the air. Each soldier of the divine martial army had been carefully selected and trained for 10-some years to become the strongest of warriors. In Longxi, they had stopped the charge of the Uzun cavalry countless times and reversed the tides of battle countless times, saving the Big Dipper army from defeat. In terms of strength, speed, and dexterity, the soldiers of the divine martial army had far surpassed the so-called elite. Even the most elite Arab soldiers appeared weak and powerless before them. Their attacks were swift and fierce, and all their techniques were simple and efficient. Everything was done with the goal of conserving energy and massacring the enemy over time. Boom boom boom. Wherever the 3,000 soldiers of the divine martial army went, the dense ranks of Arab cavalry would crumble, but the divine martial army's footsteps never changed. In just a few moments, they had reached the more than 1,000 silver behemoths. The Tang people's elite soldiers have moved out. It's about time for our soldiers to move out. Beneath the 4 massive black war banners, Governor Osman of Cairo gazed at the fiercest battle, his eyes flashing with a sharp light. This army is not one bit weaker than the Iron Wall army of the Anshi Protectorate. Ordinary elites won't be able to stop them. Have the Beheader army get ready. The Beheader army was also known as the Fury of the Nile. It was one of the 2 strongest armies under Governor Osman's command, and it had played a major role in the destruction of the Sassanid dynasty. The signature weapon of the Beheader army was the massive black swords in their hands. Their soldiers were incredibly strong and cruel, and their favorite method of killing was to cut off the heads of their opponents. They believed that this method was a sacrifice to the god of the Nile. In every battle, the Beheader army would leave behind many heads, including those of the powerful soldiers of the enemy army. Time and time again, the Beheader army became famous, and very few people knew their original name. Later on, Osman changed the name of the army to the Beheader army to intimidate the enemy army. Pass on my order. Mobilize the Blood Beast army. On the other side, Qutayba, seated on his warhorse, Victor, looked forward and suddenly spoke. His expression was calm, his eyes devoid of emotion. Before the commander next to Qutayba could reply, Abu Muslim, Ibak, and Osman couldn't help but twitch their eyes. The Blood Beast army was one of the strongest armies under Qutayba's command, an existence far stronger than the Crimson Moon Vanguard. In every battle, Qutayba would have the Crimson Moon Vanguard take the vanguard. If he encountered an opponent that was too difficult to deal with, he would send out the Blood Beast army. This army had a brutal nature, and it was extremely bloodthirsty. Every time it stepped onto the battlefield, it was as ferocious as a wild beast. It would never retreat until it had completely crushed its opponent. In the northern war zone, Qutayba's army had been practically invincible, defeating many opponents. There was no lack of powerful existences like the Taz army. Yes, my lord. A voice resounded in everyone's ears, and then a second messenger departed. Ziyad, pass on my order. Have the Iron Blood army get ready. Abu Muslim suddenly turned his head and spoke to Ziyad. Yes, my lord. Ziyad waved his hand and quickly passed on the order. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. With a deafening rumble, an army wearing armor covered in complicated patterns appeared on the battlefield and assembled behind the 4 black war banners. These soldiers had solemn and serene expressions, and the auras they exuded were as heavy as mountains. They had been tempered for a very long time and seemed invincible. These soldiers stood ramrod straight, and even though they were just standing there, the surrounding people could hear the clattering and buzzing of metal. Under the gloomy sky, light and shadow interweaved around the Iron Blood army, and there were even Arabian scimitars with inscriptions on their blades. Although they were only made of light and shadow, anyone who saw these illusory scimitars would feel like they were real scimitars, and each one of them could easily cleave apart a mountain. The Iron Blood army. This was one of the strongest armies under Abu Muslim's command, a fighting power not one bit inferior to the Iron Wall army of the Anshi Protectorate army. The two were on par. They were long-lasting fighters and extremely skilled in battle, like the most efficient of machines. A considerable number of the Iron Wall Army of the Anshi Protectorate Army had been wounded by these Iron Blood Army soldiers. If not for the fact that the towering walls of Talas made it difficult for the Iron Blood Army to climb and spread out in formation, the outcome of this battle might have been completely different. The Iron Blood Army was skilled in field battles, but it was not skilled at defending the walls. A fierce gale swept across the battlefield from the Arabs, sweeping toward the city of Talas. No one noticed that the mood of the battle had already begun to shift. Nay! On the front lines, just when the 3,000 divine martial army soldiers had broken through the defenses and were beginning to slaughter the silver behemoths, suddenly, on the other side of the great Tang left flank, the crowd began to stir, countless warhorses neighing in the chaos. Before anyone could react, a powerful army leapt out of the Arab ranks and charged toward the Arabs. These soldiers were completely different from the rest of the Arab cavalry. They were clad in thick and heavy armor, all of them covering their faces with only a narrow T-shaped slit in their armor. Most unique of all were the strangely shaped heavy swords in their hands, more than 4 feet long and covered in terrifying spikes. Kill! A heavily armored soldier angrily gripped his sword with both hands as he dismounted from his horse, his sword leaving a long scar in the air. This enormous power instantly cleaved apart a Tang dynasty soldier from his left shoulder to his right hip, even his armor. Before the corpse could even fall to the ground, the massive sword swept through the air, sending a head flying into the air. Following that, one after another, heavily armored soldiers leaped down from their warhorses with swords in their hands. The huge heavy swords in their hands chopped down continuously, and in an instant, heads flew into the air one after another. Careful! Cries of alarm resounded through the army. On the left flank, the soldiers were doing their utmost to resist, but they were unable to stop these powerful heavily armored soldiers and were quickly routed. This partial defeat quickly devolved into widespread chaos. Countless soldiers fell at the feet of these massive and muscular heavily armored soldiers. Chapter 1084. Milord, it's a top-class Arab army. Kong Xian abruptly turned his head and looked at Wang Chong, his face fraught with unease. Others might not have noticed, but Kong Xian could tell at a glance that this army that had suddenly appeared on the left flank was no ordinary elite. It was an existence on par with the Iron Wall Army. Ordinary soldiers would never be able to stop it. Zhao Fengchen. Wang Chong's eyes flashed with cold light as he sat on his white-hoofed shadow. Yes, milord. Zhao Fengchen turned his head and viciously glared at the Arab heavy-armored army on the left flank. With a wave of his hand, he immediately charged forward. Xuanwu army, hear my order. Follow me. In the blink of an eye, the 8,000 soldiers of the Xuanwu army had vanished behind Wang Chong. Not long after Zhao Fengchen led the Xuanwu army away, the roar of a behemoth came from the rear of the Arab army. Behind the 1,000-some silver behemoths, the Arab cavalry that had been madly attacking the divine martial army from all directions suddenly retreated as if they had run into a flood. Everyone hear my order. Gather the army and be on guard. At almost the same time, Starving Wolf War General Wang Sili's heart trembled as if he had sensed something. Raising his head, he could clearly see a bloody mist surging toward him. Even though he couldn't see anything, Wang Sili could sense an unprecedented killing intent from this bloody mist. Clang! The clear cry of a saber resounded through the air. Before Wang Sili could finish his investigation, a ghostly figure flew out of the distant Arab army, drawing a massive arc through the battlefield as it charged at Wang Sili with the momentum of a thunderbolt. Clang! A hair-thin, sharp blade chi flashed across the void. When Wang Sili first noticed this person, he was still 10-some zhang above the ground, but a moment later, he had become one with his saber and was right in front of Wang Sili. The blade of the saber, as narrow as a piece of paper, rapidly enlarged in Wang Sili's eyes as it slashed down. Boom! In a split second, Wang Sili did not have much time to think. He raised the greedy wolf sword in his hand and blocked the terrifying attack at the critical moment. The massive Arabian scimitar and the starving wolf greatsword clashed, the two weapons exploding with a powerful shockwave that swept through the surroundings like a storm. Pung! Wang Sili only managed to block one strike, and was immediately sent flying more than 100 feet away by the powerful force of the saber. At the last moment, Wang Sili suddenly stomped down. This stomp directly broke the ground, broke the rocks, and firmly stabilized his body. Without any hesitation, Wang Sili raised his head and looked into the distance. A bearded, hawk-eyed Arab general, dressed in dark red armor and shrouded in bloody mist, had appeared where Wang Chong had been standing a moment ago. Seeing that Wang Sili had stopped his momentum, the man was obviously shocked, but he quickly revealed a sinister smile. "Are you clear on Lord Qutaybah's orders? Retreat and die. Kill them all." Mansour savagely laughed as he pointed his scimitar forward. Rumble! Countless Arab cavalry, also dressed in dark red armor, charged out from the left and right, their bodies exuding savage and brutal auras as they lunged at the 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army. So it's a top-class Arab army? Starving Wolf War General Wang Sili sneered at this sight, immediately understanding what was going on. It was obvious that the Arabs had also sent out their strongest soldiers when they saw the Divine Martial Army move out. However, the Divine Martial Army was the illustrious Big Dipper army of the Longxi region of the Tang dynasty. The Divine Martial Army had never feared anyone. "Come, I'd like to see just how formidable the Arabs are." Wang Sili's eyes flashed with cold light as he raised the Starving Wolf greatsword, his eyes exploding with fighting intent. On the foreign battlefield, the Divine Martial Army would never retreat, and no one could make this well-tempered army retreat, not even the Blood Beast army. "Everyone follow me. Go." Wang Sili waved his sword. Without waiting for the Blood Beast Legion to attack, he led the 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army and charged at the Blood Beast Legion, which had a much larger number of people. Bang! Wang Sili shot into the air like a cannonball toward the Blood Beast Army's leader, Mansour. Bang! A dazzling halo, almost tangible, rumbled and rumbled as it shot out from under his feet, 7 stars faintly visible within this halo. And behind Wang Sili, there was a roar and a flash of light. Shockingly, a giant greedy wolf the size of a mountain appeared. Kill! The 3,000 soldiers of the Divine Martial Army behind Wang Sili showed no hesitation or fear as they swiftly adjusted their swords. More than 3,000 soldiers marched in an orderly fashion, brandishing 3,000 sharp swords as they charged at the Blood Beast Legion at an astonishing speed. The Blood Beast Legion was like a ferocious beast, and their numbers were much larger. Seeking death. The commander of the Blood Beast Legion, Mansour, sneered, a sinister look in his eyes. Clang! Mansour suddenly raised the scimitar in his hand, and like a phantom, he rapidly pounced at the Greedwolf warrior Wang Sili. The Blood Beast Army was one of Qutaybah's most valiant and skilled armies. In the northern war zone, Mansour had never encountered a match for them. Not even these Tang people could stop the Blood Beast Army. Boom! With a heaven-shaking boom, Mansour and Wang Sili crashed into each other like 2 meteors. With the two of them as the center, a circle of sandstorm wrapped in countless violent air currents quickly burst out in all directions. At practically the exact same time, boom, boom, boom. Amidst the flashes of light and shadows of swords, the swords and curved blades collided in midair, and they erupted into waves of metallic buzzing sounds that were as dense as the rain. Boom! There was an explosion of stellar energy as a Divine Martial Army soldier coldly clashed with a Blood Beast Army soldier. Both of them were extremely powerful and ferocious. There was a loud boom as an unparalleled shockwave blasted out in all directions. However, neither the Divine Martial Army nor the Blood Beast Legion soldiers moved a single inch. They didn't even take half a step back. Strength, speed, dexterity, and well-honed combat techniques, the abilities displayed by these two far surpassed those of the other elite soldiers. Even the weapons in their hands were difficult to compare. The armor and scimitars of the Blood Beast Army had all been gathered by Qutaybah using his status and the resources of the Arabian Empire. All of them were of the finest quality. As for the Divine Martial Army, Geshu Han had used his status as the Big Dipper Great General to request resources from the Holy Emperor. The weapons of the soldiers of the divine martial army had all been forged by the best craftsmen of the imperial household. These weapons were tough and dense. Even after 1,000 cruel and fierce battles, they would remain unscathed. Boom boom boom. In the blink of an eye, the 3,000 soldiers of the divine martial army and the blood beast army were engaged in battle. Every move and technique of the divine martial army was extremely refined. Their goal was to cleanly kill, and they were extremely difficult to defend against. Although the soldiers of the blood beast army were a little inferior, they were also skilled in killing. More importantly, they had the advantage in numbers. Divine Prison Army, move out. On the white-hoofed shadow, Wang Chong had been keeping a close eye on the battle between the divine martial army and the blood beast army. The two armies were about the same in strength, but the blood beast legion had the advantage in numbers. A single divine martial legion wouldn't be able to break through the enemy's defenses. In order to defeat the blood beast legion, they would have to send an even stronger force. Yes. A heaven-shaking boom came from behind Wang Chong as the 4,000 divine prison army soldiers unsheathed their swords and stepped forward. The instant they moved, a terrifying aura of slaughter burst forth from their bodies like a tidal wave. Buzz! Almost at the same time, the void trembled as a shocking wave of sword chi erupted from the 4,000 divine incarcerate soldiers. Like a waterfall, it pierced through the void, causing a wave of energy to split the sky in two. Let alone the Arab army, even the soldiers of the Tang dynasty to the left and right of the divine prison army were deeply stunned by this sight. The sharp energy exploding from the bodies of the divine prison army was like thousands of tiny swords, forcing the Arab soldiers to retreat. The divine prison army had always been the most unique of all the reinforcements. They were stern and rarely spoke, but their auras were even sharper and sharper than those of the divine martial army, like unsheathed swords. This army was ready to kill at any moment. Most puzzling of all was that no one knew the origins of this divine prison army. There were no records of this divine prison army in the military records of the Tang dynasty. Boom! Seeing the divine incarcerate army move out, all the warriors behind the first defense line parted to make way for the divine incarcerate army. A good chance. Kill them all. The Arab cavalry rejoiced at this sight. They had been attacking the first defense line for a long time, but they had never been able to break through. Now that the Tang people had opened a gap, this was an extremely rare opportunity. In the Nay, the thousands of Arab cavalry happily charged at the gap in the defense line like tigers released from their cages. Chapter 1085. Boom. A moment later, there was an earth-shattering boom, and everyone was thrown off their feet. As everyone watched, the 4,000 divine prison army soldiers stabbed forward like a giant sword. Boom boom boom. Before anyone could even see how the divine prison army had attacked, they saw row after row of elite Arab cavalry being cut down like weeds. Their corpses were riddled with holes, and countless small holes could be seen. The divine prison army soldiers didn't even look at them. They just brushed past them and quickly headed for the divine martial army and the blood beast legion. Bang bang bang. As they passed, the motionless Arab horsemen behind them were suddenly cut into countless pieces and dropped to the ground. In the blink of an eye, 7,000 to 8,000 Arab horsemen had been reduced to pulp. As for the 4,000 divine prison army soldiers, they said nothing as they rapidly advanced under everyone's horrified gazes. In this intense battle, they were not only not slowed down, they were actually getting faster and faster. No matter what kind of soldiers they used or how many Arab cavalry stood in their way, they would all be cut down like pieces of paper at their feet. What kind of soldier is this? Even Osman, Ziyad, and Ibak grimaced at this sight. Although these hundreds of thousands of Arab soldiers were not existences on the level of the Blood Beast Army or the Beheader Army, they were still no ordinary elites. In a normal battle, no matter how formidable their opponents were, they would not be able to easily kill them. Not even the Blood Beast Army or the Beheader Army could do this. But though this Tang Dynasty army was small in number, the fighting power they displayed was enough to make anyone else pale in comparison. Countless battle-hardened and formidable Great Tang elites had been cut down as easily as melons and vegetables in front of them. I underestimated them. I need to revise my previous judgment. I'm afraid this Eastern Empire is much more powerful than what we said before. Ibak said. All was quiet beneath the 4 black war banners. At this moment, no one dared to treat this Eastern Kingdom as some insignificant kingdom. There was no question that this army of Talas was an existence worthy of all their strength. Even the powerful Arabia could not treat it lightly. But the more it's like this, the more interesting it is. Compared to the remnants of the Sassanid dynasty and other weak civilizations, destroying this kind of country is much more satisfying. I feel like I can't wait any longer. Ibak licked his lips, a savage smile on his face. He turned his gaze to the dense ranks of Wushang cavalry behind Wang Chong. Are they still not going to make a move? These soldiers are already so powerful. I really wonder just how powerful the Wushang cavalry Abu Muslim speaks of are. In the distance, on the frontmost battlefield, the battle between the Divine Martial Army and the Blood Beast Army was at its most intense. Clang. A long dark red scimitar, weighing 40 to 40 jin, slashed down with unstoppable force. As the scimitar swept past, it emitted a shuddering sound as if it could even cleave through steel. But then boom! Sparks flew everywhere as a long heavy sword slashed out and collided with the dark red scimitar, producing an earth-shattering explosion. The sword-wielding Divine Martial Army soldiers' feet sank, but the Blood Beast Army soldiers' armor also began to creak. One side had a cold and expressionless expression, while the other was as malevolent as a giant beast. The Divine Martial Army had a slight advantage in terms of strength, combat techniques, and combat experience. However, they still couldn't avoid the numerical disadvantage. More and more Blood Beast Army soldiers began to gather around the Divine Martial Army. Each soldier of the Divine Martial Army was slowly being attacked by 2 or even more Blood Beast Army soldiers. Although they remained calm and showed no sign of panic or retreat, it was clear that they were slowly falling into a disadvantage. Chu Di had brought the entire Blood Beast Army while Geshu Han had only sent a portion of the Divine Martial Army. Buzz. A soldier of the Divine Martial Army brandished his Big Dipper greatsword to the limit, charging left and right, gradually falling into a tight encirclement. At this moment, 2 dark red scimitars, each weighing 70 to 80 kilograms, slashed at a Divine Martial Army soldier from 2 different directions. Squelch. There was a flash of blood as a sword pierced through a chink in the armor of the Blood Beast Army soldier, impaling him from the front to the back. At almost the same time, a second sword flew through the air. This sword was pointed diagonally and instantly pierced through the neck of a Blood Beast Army soldier. His movements were direct and efficient, without the slightest bit of finesse. Everything was done with the sole purpose of killing his opponent. Swish! The long sword slashed horizontally, and the head of a Blood Beast Army soldier flew high into the air. The headless corpse swayed a few times, and then spat out a mouthful of blood before collapsing to the ground. The Divine Prison Army soldier withdrew his sword, stepped over the corpse, and emotionlessly advanced toward the second Blood Beast Army soldier. Behind him, 2, 3, 4, a total of 4,000 fully armed Divine Prison Army soldiers strode toward the sea of Blood Beast Army soldiers with cold and resolute determination. Unlike Geshu Han's Divine Martial Army, these Divine Prison Army soldiers were all pale and bloodless, but the killing intent they exuded was far stronger than that of the Divine Martial Army. Squelch! Another sword stabbed forward. The Blood Beast Army soldiers could clearly see the sword, but they couldn't stop it. They could only watch as the sword pierced through their bodies and then fell to the ground. The Divine Incarcerate Army soldiers kept advancing. Their techniques weren't all that complicated, but the speed at which they drew their swords was incredible. Even though the Blood Beast Army soldiers were doing their utmost to stop them, the slightest difference in speed was like the difference between the heavens and the earth. Any soldier that reached the level of the Divine Martial Army, Blood Beast Army, or Divine Prison Army would experience a qualitative transformation. Boom boom boom. In a flash, the 4,000 Divine Prison Army soldiers entered the fray, causing a massive reversal on the battlefield. The Blood Beast army was actually incapable of stopping the Divine Prison Army. The 3,000 Divine Martial Army soldiers and the 4,000 Divine Prison Army soldiers immediately put the Arabs in an extremely disadvantageous position. Ziyad, pass on my order. Mobilize the Iron Blood Army. In the distance, beneath the Black War banner, Abu Muslim's eyes flashed as he suddenly spoke. A trace of astonishment flashed across Ziyad's face when he heard this. But, my lord, the Blood Beast army has only just entered the fray and hasn't completely retreated. If we mobilize now, wouldn't that be? As he spoke, Zid subconsciously glanced at Qutayba on Victor. After all, the Blood Beast army was one of Qutayba's soldiers, and it was one of his most elite and top-class forces. If he dispatched the Iron Blood army at a time like this without Qutayba's consent, it would be an affront and challenge to him. The battle had only just begun, and although Abu Muslim, Ibak, and Osman had not said anything, they were all doing their utmost to avoid a conflict with the Arab war god. Qutayba has already agreed. Abu Muslim indifferently said. Ziyad was flabbergasted. He had been standing next to Abu Muslim this entire time, only several dozen feet away from Qutayba, but Ziyad had no impression of Qutayba saying anything at all. In truth, the moment Osman's Beheader army entered the field, Qutayba already agreed. From the very start he relinquished his authority, so there's no need for you to worry about this. Abu Muslim indifferently said. Ziyad glanced at Abu Muslim and then at Arab war god Qutayba. At first, he was dazed, but then he seemed to understand something. The governors of the empire always had a subtle tacit understanding. Without any words, just a glance or two, or sometimes even just a feeling, would allow them to understand each other's intentions. During the attack on Khorasan, Abu Muslim, Osman, and Ibak had formed this sort of tacit understanding, and it was apparent that the same thing was happening again. But Ziyad still found this tacit understanding between the governors very difficult to understand. Iron Blood Army, attack. Ziyad waved his hand and gave the order to attack. Rumble. The earth quaked as the soldiers of the Iron Blood Army began to march to the front lines. The situation on the battlefield was rapidly changing. While the appearance of the Divine Prison Army had completely reversed the Divine Martial Army's disadvantage, on the Great Tang's left flank, the battle between Osman's Beheader army and the Xuanwu army had reached a fever pitch. Boom boom boom. Chapter 1086. Boom boom boom. The heavy swords of the Beheader army were constantly blocked by the Xuanwu army. Even when a sword struck a Xuanwu army soldier, it was like striking a mountain, unable to do anything to them. The 8,000 Xuanwu army soldiers seemed to be rooted to the ground, as if they were one with it. For a moment, the Beheader army soldiers felt as if they were attacking a steel mountain instead of flesh and blood. It would have been fine if the Xuanwu army was only skilled in defense, but their attacks were also extremely swift. Each sword strike was powerful, as if they would not rest until they tore the world apart. That kind of heavy attack posed a great threat even to the soldiers of the Beheader Legion. Everyone listen up. Follow me and kill all these barbarians. A voice resounded through the air. Zhao Fengchen stood at the front of the army, his back straight and his long hair fluttering in the wind. As he spoke, he gripped the Wuzi steel sword, Earth's Scar, and swung it. Boom! It was as if a bolt of lightning had flashed across the sky. In an instant, a black sword chi over 100 feet long howled out and slashed into the densely packed soldiers of the Beheader army. Ah! Amidst the deafening explosion, screams of agony rang out. Zhao Fengchen's sword tore a huge gash in the Beheader army's tight defense. Wherever the sword passed, the Beheader army soldiers would be flung into the air like broken kites. The soldiers of the Beheader army didn't even have time to scream before they were pulverized by Zhao Fengchen's fearsome sword chi, and their flesh and blood splattered all over. Kill! Making use of this opportunity, the Xuanwu army soldiers swarmed in through the opening. Black Tortoise Divine Art. This was the cultivation technique that Wang Chong had given to Zhao Fengchen. The black tortoise was an ancient divine beast. It had the neck of a snake, the body of a tortoise, and the head of a dragon. Not only was its defense powerful, its offensive power was equally astonishing. The 8,000 Imperial Army soldiers cultivated the Black Tortoise divine art and also possessed the characteristics of the Black Tortoise. It was capable of both offense and defense. Boom! Just as the Xuanwu army and Zhao Fengshen were about to break through the defenses of the Beheader army, a deafening explosion suddenly sounded 40 zhang away. In an instant, a violent gale blew sand and stones into the air. Screams rang out as more than 10 soldiers of the Xuanwu army were sent flying dozens of meters away by a terrifying wave of qi. Before their bodies even hit the ground, they were already covered in blood and gore. Upon seeing this sight, Zhao Fengshen's face warped in shock. He immediately turned his head in the direction of the explosion. A pitch-black Arab brigadier general, wielding a sword with both hands, was currently thrusting into the Xuanwu army formation. Bang! A soldier of the Xuanwu army brandished his sword and charged at him. However, with a single palm strike, the soldier's heavy armor was twisted into a twist. Boundless energy flowed through the armor and into the soldier's body, causing his blood to explode out of his body in the form of a mist. That Xuanwu army soldier didn't even have the chance to groan before he crumpled to the ground. Damn it! Zhao Fengshen's expression changed. He abruptly turned around and walked toward the commander of the Beheader army. Clang! A dazzling halo as heavy as metal and almost tangible shot out from under Zhao Fengshen's feet, the edge of this halo even sharper than a sword. Several Beheader army soldiers leaped into the air and charged at Zhao Fengshen from all directions, but before they could get close, they were struck by the halo. Kacha! With a series of crisp sounds, these soldiers were instantly struck by the terrifying power of Zhao Fengshen's halo. All their bones were shattered, and even their corpses seemed to have been cut by a sword. They were split into two and sent flying. Barbarians! I'd like to see just how much ability you have. Zhao Fengshen's expression was bone-chilling, his killing intent soaring to the heavens. A true man should follow the example of Fujiezi and submit to the border to kill barbarians. Leading the 8,000 soldiers of the Xuanwu army to Talas could be said to be the greatest dream of Zhao Fengshen's life. Wherever the sun and moon shone, no barbarian could slight the Chinese, and no one could so wantonly slaughter the soldiers of the Tang dynasty. You're dead. Zhao Fengshen narrowed his eyes at the distant Beheader army commander, gripping the Wuzi steel saber, Earth's scar, with both hands as he strode toward him. Infidel. Almost at the same time, in the distance, Karim licked his lips and saw Zhao Yuanshan in the distance. A bloodthirsty light flashed in his eyes. Karim had participated in the final war of the Sassanid dynasty. As the commander of the Beheader army, Karim had already lost count of how many enemy leaders he had personally killed. One by one, the generals of the heretic sect kept showing off their high-spirited side in front of him. However, in the end, they were all beheaded and their corpses were trampled under his feet. In a little while, I'll personally cut off your head and see just how much ability you have. Karim gave a savage chuckle. Oh! A gust of wind blew past, and a bloody mist drifted around Karim's feet. From a distance, one could see a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, all of them the corpses of the Tang dynasty. Karim could no longer remember how many people he had killed from the moment he had routed the left wing of the Tang dynasty. But no matter how many people he had killed, Karim had always had a desire to kill even more people. Clang! Pulling his sword from the body of a Xuanwu army soldier, Karim calmly strode toward the distant Zhao Fengshen. At almost the same time, Zhao Fengshen gripped the earth scar with both hands and charged at Karim. Around him, the soldiers of the Beheader army began to fall one after another. No matter how many people there were, as long as they got close to Zhao Fengshen, they would all be cut down like weeds. Blood flowed through the ground, and wherever Zhao Fengshen went, he left behind the corpses of the Beheader army soldiers. These powerful soldiers who had participated in the war against the Sassanid dynasty and the war against the Noble Frost dynasty were as weak as ants before an even stronger existence like Zhao Fengshen. Bang! A soldier of the Beheader army roared and charged at Zhao Fengshen like a tiger. But in the next moment, A powerful force slammed into his body. That force penetrated through his armor and into his organs and meridians. This veteran soldier of the Beheader army who had killed countless soldiers didn't even have the time to grunt before he died. Before his corpse could even fall to the ground, it was struck by a saber. His corpse flew several dozen zhang and drew an arc in the air before crashing into Karim, creating a large hole in the ground. Blood splattered everywhere. Bastard! Karim's eyelids twitched, and anger flashed in his eyes. Without a doubt, this Eastern heretic was using this method to challenge him. If you want to die, I'll grant your wish. Karim's eyes turned cold, and he suddenly quickened his pace, charging at Zhao Fengchen. His footsteps were as heavy as thunder, and they became more and more frequent, faster and faster. Die! With a furious roar like that of a wild beast, Karim suddenly charged into the air. Like an eagle, he charged at Zhao Fengchen amidst the endless gales. Barbarian, hand over your life. Stellar energy exploded from Zhao Fengchen's body. Wielding his saber with both hands, he also charged forward. Boom! The earth trembled, and thunder rumbled. Zhao Fengchen also charged into the air, charging at Karim. Long. The saber and sword clashed, and there was a deafening clap of thunder. In that instant, it was as if the world was being torn apart. Countless bolts of lightning shot out, and the sound of the two clashing even drowned out the sound of thousands of weapons clashing on the battlefield. Stellar energy exploded, and the shockwaves created by the collision even sent countless soldiers of the Xuanwu army and Beheader army flying. Fury of wild lightning. With a loud roar, Zhao Fengchen's movement technique changed in midair. He suddenly turned into a tiny bolt of lightning, flickering in the air. He attacked Karim from all directions at a speed that was difficult to follow with the naked eye. Every strike of his was extremely heavy, as if it could even split a mountain and sever a river. On the other side, Karim's heavy sword was also as fast as lightning. In an instant, it turned into a storm, slashing in all directions. The war halos beneath their feet clashed against each other, wave after wave of war halos flashing and disappearing. Boom, boom, boom. The intense sound of metal clashing resounded throughout the battlefield. As the commanders of both sides fought, the thousands of soldiers of the Xuanwu army and Beheader army also fought fiercely on the ground. Clang! Countless saber lights and sword shadows flashed in the sky above the army, weaving together. Clang! A Xuanwu army soldier was caught off guard. A Beheader army soldier's sword pierced through his ribs. Almost at the same time, the Xuanwu army soldier countered with a backhand strike, piercing through a gap in the Beheader army soldier's armor and into the soldier's left chest. Their eyes flickered for a moment, but they continued to slash at each other as if it was someone else who was injured. The two soldiers of the Black Tortoise army and the Beheader Legion were in the midst of a fierce battle. Their swords had clashed countless times, and the blades of their swords were filled with densely packed nicks. However, the two of them did not retreat even half a step. This was a battle between top armies and top wills. The Beheader army would not retreat. As the top imperial army of the Tang dynasty, the Xuanwu army would not retreat either. Where there was fighting, there were casualties. As the battle progressed, the Xuanwu army and the Beheader army quickly suffered many casualties. Puff puff puff. Sounds of flesh and blood rang out. A Beheader army soldier fell to the ground, his entire body a bloody mess. Almost at the same time, another Xuanwu army soldier also fell heavily. In war, blood and death were always the best ingredients. Slowly, even the eyes of the Xuanwu army soldiers turned red. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.